Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a like if you enjoy the horror stories we share. I know many of you listen to these stories before falling asleep or during the quiet hours of the night. So I'd love for you to tell me in the comments, which country or city are you listening from? I always enjoy reading your comments and discovering all the places around the world where these stories are being heard. Now, if you'd like, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin tonight's journey into a new tale of horror and mystery.
The phone rang at 10:30 on a Wednesday night, and I knew before I answered that something was wrong. It was not the hour, though rangers like myself grow accustomed to late calls bearing news of lost hikers or injured campers. It was the feeling that settled into my chest the moment that shrill ring cut through the silence of my cabin, a feeling like ice water pooling in the pit of my stomach. I let it ring 3 times before I lifted the receiver, and when I pressed it to my ear, I heard breathing on the other end. Just breathing, slow and measured, like someone gathering courage to speak. "Walter," the voice finally said. It was Harold Finch, a man I had known since we were boys throwing stones into Whitaker Creek behind the old schoolhouse in Millbrook. I had not heard his voice in nearly 4 years, not since the funeral for his father, and yet I recognized it immediately. There was something different in it now. Something hollow and distant, like he was speaking to me from the bottom of a well. "Harold," I said, and I found myself gripping the phone tighter than necessary. "That you?" There was a pause. Too long. The kind of pause that makes you check if the line has gone dead. "It's me," he said at last. "I need to talk to you about something. Something important." I waited for him to continue, but he did not. I could hear the faint crackle of static on the line, and beneath it, something else. Another breath. Someone else was listening. "Harold, who else is on this call?" Another pause. Then voices, one by one, chiming in like reluctant confessions. "It's Chester," said the second voice. Chester Beaumont, who had married young and moved to Portland, who sent Christmas cards every year with photographs of children I had never met. His voice sounded strange, too, careful in a way that made me uneasy. "Dorothy here," said the third voice, softer than the others, almost a whisper. Dorothy Ashford, the only girl who had ever run faster than me in our youth, who had gone on to become a schoolteacher in some small town in Idaho. We had not spoken in 6 years, maybe 7. "And Eugene," said the fourth voice. "Eugene Wheeler, the joker of our group, the one who could make us laugh until our sides ached even in our darkest hours." But there was no laughter in his voice now. He sounded tired. No, more than tired. He sounded afraid. 5 of us, I thought. 5 old friends who had scattered across the country like seeds in the wind, who had let years and distance erode the bonds of our youth until we were little more than names on faded envelopes. Why were we all on this call? Why now? "Well," I said, trying to sound casual even as my heart began to pound, "this is a surprise. What occasion brings the old crew back together?" Silence again, that terrible, pregnant silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, Harold spoke. "We want to take a trip, Walter. The 5 of us, like old times." "A trip," I repeated. "A camping trip," Chester added. "Somewhere remote, somewhere with real wilderness. And you being a ranger now, we figured you might know a place." I did not answer immediately. There was something they were not telling me. I could feel it in the careful way they spoke, in the spaces between their words. Something was wrong. Something had happened, or was happening, or was about to happen, and they were circling around it like wolves around a wounded deer, afraid to move in for the kill. "Why now?" I asked. "After all these years, why now?" More silence. I heard Dorothy take a shaky breath. "We just thought it would be good," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "To see each other again. Before it's too late." before it's too late." The words hung in the air like smoke, and I felt the ice in my stomach spread through my veins. "Is someone sick?" I asked. "Is that what this is about?" "No," Harold said quickly. Too quickly. "Nothing like that. We just want to get away. Clear our heads. Reconnect." I did not believe him. I did not believe any of them. But I also knew that pressing them would get me nowhere. Whatever secret they were keeping, they had agreed to keep it together, and no amount of questioning would pry it loose. "All right," I said. "I know a place. The Olympic National Forest, up in Washington. Some of the oldest, densest wilderness in the country. I patrol a section of it. Hundreds of thousands of acres, most of it untouched by human hands for centuries." I heard Chester exhale slowly. "That sounds perfect," he said. "When can we come?" We set a date for the following month, October. The tourists would be gone by then, the trails empty, the forest settling into its autumn solitude. We exchanged details, made plans, and one by one they said their goodbyes and dropped off the call until only Harold remained. "Walter," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper now. "Thank you for this. I mean it." "Harold," I said, "what is really going on?" Another pause. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel him wrestling with something inside himself. "I'll tell you when I see you," he said at last. "It's not the kind of thing I can explain over the phone. Just trust me. Please." And then he hung up, and I was left standing in my cabin with the receiver pressed to my ear and the dial tone humming like a heartbeat, wondering what I had just agreed to. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation and growing unease. I requested time off from the ranger station, citing family business, and my supervisor approved it without question. I gathered supplies, checked maps, planned routes, but no matter how busy I kept myself, I could not shake the feeling that something terrible was waiting for me at the end of this trip. I had dreams in those weeks, dark and formless dreams that left me waking in cold sweats with the taste of copper on my tongue. In the dreams, I was always in the forest, always running, always aware of something behind me that I could not see. And the trees, God, the trees, they were watching me. I know how that sounds, but that was the feeling I had, the absolute certainty that the forest itself was aware of me, was studying me, was waiting for something. The day my friends arrived, the sky was the color of wet slate. I met them at the ranger station, a squat wooden building at the end of a gravel road that wound through miles of old-growth forest. Chester was the first to step out of the rental car, and I barely recognized him. He had aged 20 years since I last saw him, his hair gone gray, his face lined and gaunt. He smiled when he saw me, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "Walter," he said, clasping my hand. "Good to see you." I nodded, searching his face for some clue to what was wrong, but finding nothing. The others emerged from the car, one by one. Harold, looking just as haggard as Chester, with dark circles under his eyes like bruises. Dorothy, thinner than I remembered, her movements quick and nervous, like a bird about to take flight. And Eugene, who had always been the largest of us, now looking somehow diminished, his broad shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. We stood there for a moment, the five of us, looking at each other in the gray morning light, and nobody spoke. There was something in the air between us, something unspoken and unspeakable, and I felt the ice in my stomach twist into a knot. "Well," I said finally, breaking the silence, "welcome to the Olympic." We loaded our packs into the back of my truck and drove deeper into the forest. The road narrowed as we went, the trees pressing in on either side until their branches met overhead, forming a tunnel of green and black that swallowed the gray sky. My friends sat in silence, staring out the windows at the passing wilderness, their faces pale and drawn. I tried to make conversation as we drove, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local history, but my words fell flat. Nobody responded. It was as if they were all trapped in their own private hells, unable or unwilling to engage with the world around them. After an hour, we reached the trailhead. This was as far as the truck could go. From here, We would hike 8 miles to the campsite I had chosen, a clearing beside a stream in one of the most remote sections of the park. Few people ever ventured this far in. The trails were poorly marked, the terrain difficult, and there was no cell service, no way to call for help if something went wrong. I parked the truck and killed the engine, and for a moment, we sat in silence, listening to the forest. It was quiet. Too quiet. No bird song, no rustle of animals in the underbrush, just the wind sighing through the branches like a breath held too long. "Everyone ready?" I asked. They nodded, though none of them looked ready. They looked like prisoners being led to the gallows. We set off down the trail, single file, with me in the lead. The forest closed around us almost immediately, the trees rising on either side like the walls of a cathedral, their trunks so thick and old that they seemed less like plants and more like monuments to some ancient and forgotten god. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of rotting leaves and wet bark, and the ground beneath our feet was soft and spongy, swallowing our footsteps into silence. I kept my pace slow, mindful of my friends' condition. They were city people now, unused to the demands of the wilderness, and I could hear them struggling behind me, their breath coming in ragged gasps, their feet stumbling on roots and rocks. But I did not slow down too much. The daylight would not last forever, and I wanted to reach the campsite before dark. As we walked, I found myself watching the forest with new eyes. I had patrolled these trails for nearly a decade, had spent countless nights alone beneath these ancient trees. And yet now, with my friends behind me and that cold knot of dread in my stomach, the forest felt different. It felt alive. It felt aware. Every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves seemed deliberate, intentional, as if the forest was speaking a language I could not quite understand. Around noon, we stopped to rest beside a fallen log. Dorothy collapsed onto the moss-covered wood, her face flushed, her hands shaking as she reached for her water bottle. Chester sat beside her, his eyes fixed on the trees around us with an expression I could not read. Harold paced back and forth, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides. And Eugene stood apart from the rest of us, staring down the trail we had come from, his head cocked slightly to one side as if listening for something. "Anyone else hear that?" he asked. We all fell silent, straining our ears. I heard nothing but the wind and the distant drip of water somewhere deeper in the forest. "Hear what?" I asked. Eugene shook his head slowly. "Nothing," he said. I thought I heard. Never mind. It's nothing. But I saw the way his eyes kept darting back to the trail, the way his hands trembled slightly as he lifted his water bottle to his lips, and I knew he had heard something. Something that had frightened him. We continued on. The trail grew steeper, winding up through a series of switchbacks that left us all gasping for breath. The trees grew denser here, their branches intertwining overhead until only slivers of gray sky were visible between the leaves. The light dimmed, casting everything in a perpetual twilight that made it difficult to judge the passage of time. It was late afternoon when I first noticed that something was wrong. I had been leading the group for hours, my mind wandering as my body moved on autopilot, when I suddenly realized that I did not recognize where we were. The trail should have curved to the right here, following the contour of the hillside down toward the stream, but instead it continued straight ahead, plunging deeper into the forest. I stopped, frowning, and pulled out my map. "Everything okay?" Harold asked, coming up beside me. I did not answer. I was too busy staring at the map, trying to reconcile what I saw on the paper with what I saw around me. It was not possible. I knew these trails like I knew my own body. I had walked this exact route dozens of times, and yet here I was, standing on a path that did not exist, in a part of the forest I had never seen before. "Walter?" Harold said again, his voice tighter now. "What's wrong?" I folded the map and put it away. "Nothing," I said. "Just got turned around for a second. We're almost there." It was a lie, and I think Harold knew it was a lie, but he did not press me. None of them did. They were too tired, too lost in their own thoughts, too wrapped up in whatever secret they were keeping to question my navigation. I chose a direction and started walking again, hoping that I would recognize something, that the familiar landmarks would reappear and guide me back to the route I knew. But the forest remained stubbornly unfamiliar, each tree looking exactly like the last, each twist of the trail leading deeper into the unknown. The light faded faster than it should have. I checked my watch and was shocked to see that it was nearly 5 o'clock. We had been hiking for 8 hours, far longer than the route should have taken. And yet we had not reached the campsite. We had not even reached the stream. I called a halt as the first tendrils of darkness began to seep through the trees. "We can't make it to the original site," I admitted, the words bitter in my mouth. "We'll have to camp here tonight." Nobody argued. They were too exhausted, too disoriented, too frightened to do anything but nod and begin unpacking their gear. We set up our tents in a small clearing, the ground thick with fallen needles that muffled our movements. I gathered wood for a fire, my hands moving automatically while my mind raced, trying to understand how I had gotten so turned around, how the forest I knew so well had suddenly become a labyrinth. The fire took longer to light than it should have. The wood was damp despite the dry weather, and the flames kept sputtering out, leaving us in darkness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the fire caught, sending a weak orange glow flickering across the clearing. We gathered around it, the 5 of us, our faces gaunt and shadowed in the firelight. Nobody spoke for a long time. The silence of the forest pressed in on us, heavy and absolute, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the occasional pop of sap boiling inside the logs. It was Eugene who finally broke the silence. "I think we should tell him," he said, and his voice was flat, defeated. "He deserves to know." Harold shot him a sharp look. "Not yet. Not yet." Eugene laughed bitterly. "Look at us, Harold. Look at where we are. If not now, when?" Harold's jaw tightened. I said not yet. "Tell me what?" I asked, looking from one to the other. "What is going on? What have you been keeping from me?" Another pause. I saw Dorothy and Chester exchange a glance, something passing between them that I could not interpret. Then Dorothy sighed, a long, shaky exhalation, and turned to face me. "Walter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're being followed." The words hit me like a physical blow. Followed? By who? By what? "We don't know," Chester said. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees, his eyes fixed on the fire. "It started about 6 months ago. For me, at least. I started noticing things, little things at first, the feeling of being watched when I was alone, shadows moving in my peripheral vision, sounds at night, outside my window, like someone breathing. I thought I was going crazy," Dorothy added. "I went to a doctor, had all sorts of tests done. They found nothing wrong with me, but the feeling never went away. It only got stronger. Then we started talking to each other," Harold said, his voice heavy, "comparing notes. That's when we realized it wasn't just one of us. It was all of us. All 4 of us, experiencing the same thing, in different cities, hundreds of miles apart." I stared at them, my mind struggling to process what they were telling me. "And you thought coming out here would help?" I asked. "You thought bringing whatever is following you into the middle of the wilderness would make things better?" Harold looked away. "We thought we could lose it," he said quietly. "Out here, where there are no roads, no buildings, nothing but trees and mountains. We thought maybe we could shake it off, or confront it, or, I don't know. We just had to do something. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to shout at them for bringing their problem, whatever it was, into my forest, into my sanctuary. But when I looked at their faces, at the fear and desperation in their eyes, I could not find it in me. These were my friends, the people I had grown up with, had shared my childhood with, had trusted with my secrets and my dreams. Whatever was happening to them, I could not abandon them to face it alone. "All right," I said at last, "tell me everything. From the beginning, tell me exactly what you've seen and heard." And they did. One by one, they recounted their experiences, their voices hushed, as if they were afraid that speaking the words aloud would summon the thing they feared. Chester told me about the figure he had glimpsed standing in his backyard one night, a tall, dark shape that vanished when he turned on the porch light. Dorothy spoke of footsteps in her attic, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth above her bed while she lay frozen with terror. Eugene described the phone calls, dozens of them, always in the middle of the night, the line silent except for that same slow, measured breathing I had heard on the call with Harold. And Harold told me about the drawings. He had found them tucked under his pillow, slipped beneath his car windshield, pushed through the mail slot in his front door. Simple drawings, done in what looked like charcoal or ash, depicting 5 figures standing in a circle, 5 figures surrounded by trees. I felt the blood drain from my face as he spoke. 5 figures surrounded by trees. That was us. That was exactly what we were doing right now, huddled around this fire in the heart of this ancient forest. "When did you get the last one?" I asked. Harold did not meet my eyes. "Yesterday," he said, "before we left for the airport." "And you still came?" He nodded slowly. "We had to," he said. "Don't you understand, Walter? Running doesn't work. Hiding doesn't work. Whatever this thing is, it finds us. It always finds us. The only thing we haven't tried is facing it head on." I wanted to argue with him, to point out the insanity of what he was suggesting, but before I could speak, something happened that drove all other thoughts from my mind. The fire went out, not died down, not sputtered out. Went out, all at once, as if a giant hand had reached down and snuffed it like a candle. We were plunged into darkness so complete that I could not see my own hand in front of my face. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I could hear my friends breathing around me, rapid and shallow, and beyond that, the silence of the forest, pressing in on us from all sides. And then I heard it. Footsteps. They came from somewhere to my left, slow and deliberate, the soft crunch of needles beneath careful feet. I turned my head, straining to see through the darkness, but there was nothing. Only black. The footsteps stopped. The silence stretched on, unbearable in its intensity. Then, from somewhere much closer than before, I heard breathing. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it twice. When I finally managed to switch it on, the beam of light cut through the darkness like a knife, illuminating the trees around us in harsh white relief. There was nothing there. I swept the light in a circle, searching the shadows, but I saw only trees and underbrush and the pale, terrified faces of my friends. Whatever had been there, whatever had been breathing beside us in the dark, was gone. Nobody slept that night. We rebuilt the fire and kept it burning until dawn, feeding it branch after branch, our eyes fixed on the darkness beyond its glow. Every sound made us jump. Every rustle of leaves sent our hearts racing. But nothing else happened. The footsteps did not return. The breathing did not come again. When the first gray light of morning began to filter through the trees, I stood and stretched my aching muscles. "We need to move," I said. "I want to get out of here." Nobody argued. We broke camp in record time, shoving our gear into our packs with none of the care we had taken the day before. All that mattered was getting away from this place, this clearing where something had come so close to us in the night. But as I shouldered my pack and turned to lead the way back to the trail, I stopped. Something was wrong. The clearing looked different in the daylight, the trees arranged in patterns I did not recognize, the ground sloping in the wrong direction. I turned in a slow circle, searching for something familiar, some landmark I could use to orient myself. There was nothing. Nothing but trees in every direction, stretching away into endless green gloom. "Walter," Harold said. "What's wrong?" "I don't know where we are," I admitted. "The trail should be right over there, but I don't see it." Chester pushed past me, crashing through the underbrush in the direction I had pointed. I heard him curse as branches whipped at his face, heard his footsteps recede into the forest. A moment later he came back, his face pale. "There's nothing there," he said. "No trail, no markers, nothing." I felt something cold settle into the pit of my stomach. I knew these woods. I had spent years learning every ridge and valley, every stream and clearing, and yet now, standing in this unfamiliar place, I felt like a stranger in my own home. "It's okay," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "I have a compass. We can navigate by that." I pulled the compass from my pocket and held it up, waiting for the needle to settle. But the needle did not settle. It spun in slow, lazy circles, never stopping, never pointing in any consistent direction. I stared at it, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. Compasses did not do this. Compasses pointed north. That was the entire purpose of a compass, and yet here it was, spinning endlessly, as if the magnetic poles themselves had been scrambled. Dorothy came up beside me and looked at the compass. Her face went white. "Oh God," she whispered. "It's just like what happened to me." "What do you mean?" My compass, she said. At home. I bought one after the first time I felt like I was being watched. Thought it might help me feel more in control, more grounded. But it started doing this, spinning and spinning, whenever I felt the presence near me. I looked up at her, at the naked fear in her eyes, and I felt my own fear rising to match it. We're not just lost, I realized. We're trapped. Something has us trapped in this forest, something that can bend the very laws of nature to keep us here. We started walking anyway. There was nothing else to do. I chose a direction at random, and we set off, pushing through the dense underbrush, climbing over fallen logs, wading through streams that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The forest closed around us, indifferent to our struggle, ancient and vast, and utterly uncaring. Hours passed. The light dimmed and brightened and dimmed again, but we made no progress. Every clearing we reached looked the same as the last. Every hill we climbed revealed only more hills beyond. It was as if the forest was repeating itself, looping us back to the same places over and over again, no matter which direction we traveled. By mid-afternoon, we were exhausted. We collapsed beside a moss-covered boulder, too tired to go on, too frightened to stop. I handed out food and water, rationing our supplies carefully. At the rate we were going, they would not last long. We have to be smart about this, I said. Conserve our energy. Wait for an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Eugene asked bitterly. We don't even know what we're dealing with. Then we'll figure it out, I said. We'll observe. We'll take notes. We'll find a pattern. But there was no pattern. There was only the forest, endless and unchanging, and the growing certainty that we were not alone. That night, we made camp again, building another fire in another clearing that looked exactly like the one from the night before. I was not even sure if it was a different place. For all I knew, we could have walked in a perfect circle and ended up right where we started. As darkness fell, the silence returned. That same oppressive, unnatural silence that made the air feel thick and heavy, that pressed against my eardrums like water against a dam. I sat with my back against a tree, my flashlight in one hand and my hunting knife in the other, watching the darkness beyond the firelight. The others sat around the fire, their faces pale and drawn. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say. It was nearly midnight when I heard it. A sound so faint that at first I thought I had imagined it. A whisper, barely audible, coming from somewhere in the trees. I tensed, my hand tightening on the knife. Did you hear that? The others nodded, their eyes wide with fear. The whisper came again, a little louder this time. I could not make out words, but there was a rhythm to it, a cadence, like someone reciting a prayer or a poem. It seemed to move around us, circling the clearing, first on my left, then behind me, then on my right. Show yourself, I called out, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Whatever you are, show yourself. The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was worse somehow than the sound itself. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. Then, at the very edge of the firelight, I saw movement. It was subtle at first, just a shifting of shadows, a deepening of the darkness between two trees. But as I watched, the shadows began to coalesce, to take shape, to form something that was almost, but not quite, human. I could not look directly at it. Every time I tried to focus my eyes on the shape, my vision seemed to slide away, as if my brain was refusing to process what it was seeing. But I could see it in my peripheral vision, a tall, thin figure with limbs that were too long, a head that was too large, eyes that burned with a cold, pale light. None of us moved. None of us spoke. We sat frozen, paralyzed by a fear so deep and primal that it seemed to reach down into the very core of our being and hold us in place. The figure stood at the edge of the firelight for what felt like hours, watching us with those terrible, burning eyes. Then, slowly, it began to move. Not toward us, but around us, circling the clearing just as the whisper had done, its movements fluid and wrong, like a marionette controlled by unseen strings. I watched it, unable to look away, unable to think, unable to do anything but sit there and tremble. And as it circled, I began to hear the whisper again, louder now, close enough that I could almost make out words. Almost, but not quite. The language was one I had never heard before, ancient and guttural and somehow obscene. It made my skin crawl, made my teeth ache, made something deep inside me twist with revulsion. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. The shadows unraveled, the burning eyes winked out, and we were alone again in the flickering firelight. For a long time, nobody moved. Then Dorothy let out a sob, covering her face with her hands, and the spell was broken. We all began to talk at once, our voices high and frantic, trying to make sense of what we had just witnessed. "What was that thing?" Chester demanded. "I don't know," I said. "I have never seen anything like it." "It was watching us," Eugene said. "Did you see the way it looked at us? Like we were insects, like we were nothing." "We didn't imagine it," Harold said, and there was a strange relief in his voice. "We all saw it. It's real. Whatever has been following us, whatever has been haunting us for the past 6 months, it's real." I wanted to share his relief, but I could not, because I had seen the thing at the edge of the firelight, and I had seen something else too. Something that made my blood run cold. It had been smiling. The next few days blurred together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. We continued to search for a way out of the forest, but every path led us in circles. Every landmark turned out to be a mirage. Our supplies dwindled, our spirits collapsed, and every night the figure returned. It never came into the firelight. It stayed at the edges, watching, circling, whispering in that terrible ancient language. Sometimes there seemed to be more than one of them, shadows gathering in the darkness like wolves around a wounded deer. Sometimes I thought I heard voices among the whispers. Voices that sounded almost human, calling our names, begging us to follow them into the dark. We resisted. God help us, we resisted. We huddled around our fires and told ourselves that as long as we stayed in the light, we would be safe. But the light was growing weaker. Our firewood was running low, our flashlight batteries dying, our bodies breaking down from lack of food and sleep. On the 5th night, Chester snapped. I was sitting beside the fire, my eyes fixed on the darkness, when I heard him stand up behind me. I turned, expecting to see him adding wood to the flames or checking his pack for supplies. Instead, I saw him walking toward the trees, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes fixed on something I could not see. "Chester," I called out. "Chester, what are you doing?" He did not answer. He did not even slow down. He just kept walking, straight toward the darkness, straight toward the edge of the firelight where the shadows waited. I scrambled to my feet and ran after him, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him back. But he was stronger than I expected, and he shook me off with a violence that sent me stumbling to the ground. "Let me go," he said, and his voice was strange, dreamy, like he was talking in his sleep. "They are calling me. Can't you hear them? They are calling my name. Chester." "There's nothing there," I said. "It's just the forest. It's just the dark." But he was not listening. He pulled free of my grip and stepped out of the firelight, into the shadows, and was gone. I screamed his name. I plunged after him into the darkness, my flashlight beam cutting through the black, searching desperately for any sign of him. But there was nothing. No sound, no movement, no trace of my friend. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed him whole. I searched for hours. The others joined me, and we combed through the trees, calling Chester's name until our throats were raw. But we found nothing. Not a footprint, not a broken branch, not a single sign that he had ever existed. When dawn came, we gathered in the clearing, our faces gray with exhaustion and grief. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. Chester was gone, taken by whatever presence haunted this forest, and we could not bring him back. "We have to keep moving," I said at last. "We can't stay here." "Why not?" Dorothy asked, her voice flat and hopeless. "What's the point? We're never getting out of here. You know that as well as I do." I did know it. Deep down, in the part of my mind that I tried so hard to ignore, I had known it for days. We were never leaving this forest. Whatever force held us here was too strong, too ancient, too utterly beyond our comprehension to be escaped or defeated. We were like mice in a trap, waiting for the cat to finish playing with us. But I could not say that. I could not admit defeat. Not while my friends were still alive, still looking to me for guidance. "We keep moving," I said again. "As long as we are moving, we have a chance." So we moved. We packed up our meager supplies and set off into the forest, one less than we had been the day before. The trees seemed to press closer now, the shadows deeper, the silence more oppressive. Every step felt like a step further from safety, further from hope, further into the heart of something dark and terrible. That afternoon, we found the cabin. It appeared out of nowhere, materializing in a clearing that had not been there a moment before. One second there was nothing but trees, and the next there was this, a squat wooden structure with a sagging roof and walls so weathered that they were almost gray. It looked old, impossibly old, like something from a fever dream or a forgotten fairy tale. We stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at it, nobody willing to take the first step. "That wasn't here before," Eugene said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know it wasn't here before." "I don't care," Dorothy said, and there was a wild desperation in her eyes. "It's shelter, it's walls, it's better than being out here in the open." She was right. As much as the cabin frightened me, there was a fireplace against one wall, the hearth cold and filled with ashes that looked centuries old. A wooden table stood in the center of the room, and around it were arranged 4 chairs, each one carved with symbols that made my skin crawl. 4 chairs. There had been 5 of us when we entered the forest. Now there were 4. I pushed the thought from my mind and began to explore. The cabin was sparse, just the main room and a small back chamber that might have been a bedroom at some point. There were no personal belongings, no photographs or letters or any sign of who had lived here. Just the furniture and the dust and the silence. "Well, make camp here tonight," I said. "Get a fire going in the hearth. At least we will have walls around us." We gathered firewood from the surrounding forest, staying close together, never letting anyone out of sight. The shadows were lengthening by the time we had enough, and we hurried back to the cabin, our arms full of branches, our hearts pounding with primal fear. I built the fire in the hearth, and its warmth filled the small room, pushing back the chill that had settled into our bones. We ate our last scraps of food in silence, too tired and too scared to speak. Then we arranged ourselves around the fire and waited for night to fall. It did not take long. The darkness came down like a curtain, sudden and absolute, and with it came the sounds, the whispers, the footsteps, the breathing. They were all around us now, circling the cabin, probing for weaknesses, looking for a way in. I do not know when I fell asleep. I had not meant to, had sworn to keep watch all night, but the exhaustion was too much, and at some point my eyes closed and I drifted away into a dark and dreamless void. When I woke, the fire had gone out and the cabin was freezing. I sat up, blinking in the darkness, and realized that something was wrong. The shapes around me, the huddled forms of my friends, they were wrong. There were too few of them. I fumbled for my flashlight and switched it on. The beam revealed Harold and Dorothy, still asleep by the dead fire, but the space where Eugene had been lying was empty. His blanket was thrown aside, his pack undisturbed, and the door to the cabin was standing open, swinging slightly in a breeze that should not have existed. "Eugene," I whispered. "Eugene. Where are you?" No answer. Just the wind and the darkness and the soft, rhythmic sound of whispers outside the door. I did not go after him. I could not. I knew what I would find if I went out there, which is to say, nothing at all. Eugene was gone, taken like Chester had been, swallowed by the forest and its terrible inhabitants. I closed the door and wedged a chair against it. Then I sat down with my back against the wall and my knife in my hand and waited for dawn. Harold woke first, his eyes snapping open as if from a nightmare. When he saw the empty space where Eugene had been, his face went white. "No," he said. "No, no, no." Dorothy woke a moment later, and when she understood what had happened, she began to cry. Great, heaving sobs that shook her whole body, that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than tears. I let her cry. There was nothing I could do, nothing I could say that would make this better. 2 of my oldest friends were gone, taken by something I could not see or understand, and I was powerless to stop it. When she finally quieted, I spoke. "We have to leave," I said. "We have to find a way out of here, or we're all going to end up like them." "How?" Harold asked. His voice was hollow, defeated. "We have been walking for days. We are no closer to the edge than when we started." "I don't know," I admitted. "But staying here is not an option. Whatever is in this forest, it knows where we are. It is hunting us. If we stay in one place, it will pick us off one by one." So we left the cabin and plunged back into the forest. But this time, something was different. The trees seemed less dense, the shadows less deep. For the first time since we had arrived, I felt a glimmer of hope. We walked for hours, following a faint trail that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. The sun rose higher, filtering through the branches, casting dappled light on the forest floor. Birds sang in the canopy above, a sound so normal, so mundane, that it brought tears to my eyes. "Do you hear that?" Dorothy asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Birds. Actual birds." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We were getting somewhere. After days of wandering in circles, we were finally making progress. Late in the afternoon, we crested a ridge and found ourselves looking down at a road. Not a trail, not a path, but an actual paved road, winding through the trees below us. I nearly collapsed with relief. I had never been so happy to see asphalt in my life. We scrambled down the slope, sliding on loose dirt and grabbing at branches to keep our balance, and emerged onto the road just as a pickup truck came around a bend. The driver stopped when he saw us, his face a mask of confusion and concern. He was an older man, weathered and gray, with the look of someone who had spent his whole life in these mountains. "You folks all right?" he asked, leaning out the window. "You look like you have seen a ghost." I laughed at that, a harsh, bitter laugh that was half sob. "Please," I said, "we need help. We have been lost in the forest for days. Our friends are missing. We need to get to a phone." The driver nodded, his expression grave. "Get in," he said. "There is a ranger station about 10 miles down the road. We will call for help from there." We climbed into the bed of the truck, too exhausted to argue. As the driver pulled away, I turned and looked back at the forest we had just escaped. It stood there, dark and silent, the trees rising like sentinels against the pale sky. And at the very edge of the trees, just where the light gave way to shadow, I saw them. Figures. A dozen of them, maybe more, standing motionless among the trunks, their eyes burning with that terrible pale light. They did not move, did not react as we drove away. They just watched, patient and eternal, as if they knew that our escape was only temporary, that we would return, that we would always return. I turned away and did not look back again. The ranger station was a small building at a crossroads, manned by a single officer who looked at us with a mixture of pity and disbelief as we told our story. He made calls, sent out search parties, filed reports, but I could see it in his eyes. He did not believe us. He thought we were delusional, victims of hypothermia or dehydration or some other mundane affliction. They found nothing, of course. No trace of Chester or Eugene, no sign of the cabin we had sheltered in, no evidence that anything unusual had happened at all. The search parties combed through the forest for days, but they reported nothing but trees and rocks and the normal, expected emptiness of the wilderness. Dorothy went home to Idaho. Harold went home to wherever he had come from. I do not even remember anymore. We did not say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. I stayed. Someone had to stay, had to be here in case Chester and Eugene found their way out. It was a foolish hope, I knew. They were gone, truly gone, swallowed by whatever lived in the heart of that forest. But I could not bring myself to leave. The days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into months. I returned to work at the ranger station, patrolling the trails, guiding lost hikers back to safety, doing all the mundane tasks that had once given my life meaning. But nothing felt the same. The forest that had been my home, my sanctuary, now felt like a prison, a cage with bars made of bark and leaves. I started seeing things, shadows that moved when they should not have, figures standing at the edge of clearings, just where the light met the dark. The whispers came back too, faint at first, barely audible, but growing louder with each passing day. They were calling me, I realized. They had let me go, but they had not released me. They were still there, waiting, patient and eternal, watching me with their burning eyes. Then the phone calls started. The first one came late at night, just as I was drifting off to sleep. The ring cut through the silence of my cabin, sharp and insistent. And when I answered, I heard nothing but breathing on the other end. Slow, measured breathing. The same breathing I had heard on that first call with Harold and the others. I hung up without speaking and tried to go back to sleep. But I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me, that unseen eyes were peering through my windows, that the darkness outside was alive and aware. The calls continued. Every night, sometimes multiple times a night, the phone would ring, and I would answer, and there would be nothing but that terrible breathing. I stopped answering after a while, but the ringing continued, endless and relentless, a constant reminder that I was not free, that I never would be. Then I found the first drawing. It was tucked under my pillow, a simple sketch done in what looked like charcoal or ash. 5 figures standing in a circle, surrounded by trees. One of the figures was crossed out. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. This was exactly what Harold had described. The drawings that had appeared in his home, in his car, in his mailbox. The drawings that showed 5 figures surrounded by trees, but now one of the figures was crossed out. One of us was gone. I burned the drawing and tried to forget about it, but more appeared, under my car windshield, slipped through the mail slot, wedged beneath the door of my cabin. Each one showed the same scene, 5 figures in a circle, but with each new drawing, another figure was crossed out. 2 crossed out, 3 crossed out, 4 crossed out. I knew what was coming. I knew that eventually there would be a drawing with all 5 figures crossed out, and that would be the end. Whatever had let me escape, whatever had allowed me to walk out of that forest while Chester and Eugene remained trapped inside, had only been biding its time. It was coming for me, just as it had come for my friends, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. It did not take long. The darkness came down like a curtain, sudden and absolute, and with it came the sounds, the whispers, the footsteps, the breathing. They were all around us now, circling the cabin, probing for weaknesses, looking for a way in. I do not know when I fell asleep. I had not meant to, had sworn to keep watch all night, but the exhaustion was too much, and at some point my eyes closed and I drifted away into a dark and dreamless void. When I woke, the fire had gone out and the cabin was freezing. I sat up, blinking in the darkness, and realized that something was wrong. The shapes around me, the huddled forms of my friends, they were wrong. There were too few of them. I fumbled for my flashlight and switched it on. The beam revealed Harold and Dorothy, still asleep by the dead fire, but the space where Eugene had been lying was empty. His blanket was thrown aside, his pack undisturbed, and the door to the cabin was standing open, swinging slightly in a breeze that should not have existed. "Eugene," I whispered. "Eugene. Where are you?" No answer. Just the wind and the darkness and the soft, rhythmic sound of whispers outside the door. I did not go after him. I could not. I knew what I would find if I went out there, which is to say, nothing at all. Eugene was gone, taken like Chester had been, swallowed by the forest and its terrible inhabitants. I closed the door and wedged a chair against it. Then I sat down with my back against the wall and my knife in my hand and waited for dawn. Harold woke first, his eyes snapping open as if from a nightmare. When he saw the empty space where Eugene had been, his face went white. "No," he said. "No, no, no." Dorothy woke a moment later, and when she understood what had happened, she began to cry. Great, heaving sobs that shook her whole body, that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than tears. I let her cry. There was nothing I could do, nothing I could say that would make this better. 2 of my oldest friends were gone, taken by something I could not see or understand, and I was powerless to stop it. When she finally quieted, I spoke. "We have to leave," I said. "We have to find a way out of here, or we're all going to end up like them." "How?" Harold asked. His voice was hollow, defeated. "We have been walking for days. We are no closer to the edge than when we started." "I don't know," I admitted. "But staying here is not an option. Whatever is in this forest, it knows where we are. It is hunting us. If we stay in one place, it will pick us off one by one." So we left the cabin and plunged back into the forest. But this time, something was different. The trees seemed less dense, the shadows less deep. For the first time since we had arrived, I felt a glimmer of hope. We walked for hours, following a faint trail that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. The sun rose higher, filtering through the branches, casting dappled light on the forest floor. Birds sang in the canopy above, a sound so normal, so mundane, that it brought tears to my eyes. "Do you hear that?" Dorothy asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Birds. Actual birds." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We were getting somewhere. After days of wandering in circles, we were finally making progress. Late in the afternoon, we crested a ridge and found ourselves looking down at a road. Not a trail, not a path, but an actual paved road, winding through the trees below us. I nearly collapsed with relief. I had never been so happy to see asphalt in my life. We scrambled down the slope, sliding on loose dirt and grabbing at branches to keep our balance, and emerged onto the road just as a pickup truck came around a bend. The driver stopped when he saw us, his face a mask of confusion and concern. He was an older man, weathered and gray, with the look of someone who had spent his whole life in these mountains. "You folks all right?" he asked, leaning out the window. "You look like you have seen a ghost." I laughed at that, a harsh, bitter laugh that was half sob. "Please," I said, "we need help. We have been lost in the forest for days. Our friends are missing. We need to get to a phone." The driver nodded, his expression grave. "Get in," he said. "There is a ranger station about 10 miles down the road. We will call for help from there." We climbed into the bed of the truck, too exhausted to argue. As the driver pulled away, I turned and looked back at the forest we had just escaped. It stood there, dark and silent, the trees rising like sentinels against the pale sky. And at the very edge of the trees, just where the light gave way to shadow, I saw them. Figures. A dozen of them, maybe more, standing motionless among the trunks, their eyes burning with that terrible pale light. They did not move, did not react as we drove away. They just watched, patient and eternal, as if they knew that our escape was only temporary, that we would return, that we would always return. I turned away and did not look back again. The ranger station was a small building at a crossroads, manned by a single officer who looked at us with a mixture of pity and disbelief as we told our story. He made calls, sent out search parties, filed reports. But I could see it in his eyes. He did not believe us. He thought we were delusional, victims of hypothermia or dehydration or some other mundane affliction. They found nothing, of course. No trace of Chester or Eugene, no sign of the cabin we had sheltered in, no evidence that anything unusual had happened at all. The search parties combed through the forest for days, but they reported nothing but trees and rocks and the normal, expected emptiness of the wilderness. Dorothy went home to Idaho. Harold went home to wherever he had come from. I do not even remember anymore. We did not say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. I stayed. Someone had to stay, had to be here in case Chester and Eugene found their way out. It was a foolish hope, I knew. They were gone, truly gone, swallowed by whatever lived in the heart of that forest. But I could not bring myself to leave. The days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into months. I returned to work at the ranger station, patrolling the trails, guiding lost hikers back to safety, doing all the mundane tasks that had once given my life meaning. But nothing felt the same. The forest that had been my home, my sanctuary, now felt like a prison, a cage with bars made of bark and leaves. I started seeing things, shadows that moved when they should not have, figures standing at the edge of clearings, just where the light met the dark. The whispers came back too, faint at first, barely audible, but growing louder with each passing day. They were calling me, I realized. They had let me go, but they had not released me. They were still there, waiting, patient and eternal, watching me with their burning eyes. Then the phone calls started. The first one came late at night, just as I was drifting off to sleep. The ring cut through the silence of my cabin, sharp and insistent. And when I answered, I heard nothing but breathing on the other end. Slow, measured breathing. The same breathing I had heard on that first call with Harold and the others. I hung up without speaking and tried to go back to sleep. But I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me, that unseen eyes were peering through my windows, that the darkness outside was alive and aware. The calls continued. Every night, sometimes multiple times a night, the phone would ring, and I would answer, and there would be nothing but that terrible breathing. I stopped answering after a while, but the ringing continued, endless and relentless, a constant reminder that I was not free, that I never would be. Then I found the first drawing. It was tucked under my pillow, a simple sketch done in what looked like charcoal or ash. 5 figures standing in a circle, surrounded by trees. One of the figures was crossed out. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. This was exactly what Harold had described. The drawings that had appeared in his home, in his car, in his mailbox. The drawings that showed 5 figures surrounded by trees, but now one of the figures was crossed out. One of us was gone. I burned the drawing and tried to forget about it, but more appeared, under my car windshield, slipped through the mail slot, wedged beneath the door of my cabin. Each one showed the same scene, 5 figures in a circle, but with each new drawing, another figure was crossed out. 2 crossed out, 3 crossed out, 4 crossed out. I knew what was coming. I knew that eventually there would be a drawing with all 5 figures crossed out, and that would be the end. Whatever had let me escape, whatever had allowed me to walk out of that forest while Chester and Eugene remained trapped inside, had only been biding its time. It was coming for me, just as it had come for my friends, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I tried to run. I packed my bags, got in my car, and drove as far and as fast as I could. I crossed state lines, changed my name, rented an apartment in a city where nobody knew me. But it did not matter. The phone calls followed me, the drawings found me, and at night, when the darkness pressed against my windows, I could hear the whispers, the footsteps, the breathing. It was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when. I am writing this now because I need someone to know what happened. I need someone to understand that the forest is not empty, that there are things out there older and more terrible than anything we can imagine. I am writing this because I know I do not have much time left. The drawings have stopped coming. The last one arrived yesterday, and it showed all 5 figures crossed out. Tonight, when I look out my window, I can see them, the figures, standing in the shadows beneath the streetlights, their eyes burning with that pale, cold fire. They are waiting for me. They have always been waiting for me. I could try to run again, I could try to fight, but I know it would be pointless. You cannot escape something that is everywhere. You cannot fight something that exists outside the boundaries of time and space. So I will do what they want. I will go back to the forest, back to the place where it all started. Maybe I will find Chester and Eugene. Maybe I will find answers. Or maybe I will find nothing but darkness and silence and the terrible, eternal patience of something that has been waiting since before the first humans walked the earth. Either way, it will be over. If you are reading this, if you have made it this far, I have only one piece of advice. Stay away from the forests. Stay away from the wild places, the lonely places, the places where the shadows are too deep and the silence is too complete. Because they are out there, watching, waiting, and once they notice you, once they mark you as theirs, there is no escape. I know, I have tried. The forest is calling me now. I can hear the whispers, louder than they have ever been, calling my name, welcoming me home. The figures are moving, converging on my location, their forms flickering like flames in a wind I cannot feel. It is time. Goodbye. I drove back to Washington in a state of numb acceptance. The landscape scrolled past my windows, endless miles of highway and farmland and small towns that blurred together into a single meaningless smear. I did not stop to eat or sleep. I did not call anyone to say goodbye. What would have been the point? The people I cared about were either dead or lost, or so far removed from this nightmare that involving them would only spread the contagion. The Olympic National Forest looked different when I arrived, or maybe I was different, and that changed how I saw it. The trees that had once seemed majestic and ancient now loomed over the road like gnarled fingers, reaching toward me with wooden claws. The fog that drifted through the valleys was not atmospheric, but suffocating, a blanket of gray that muffled sound and light and hope. I parked my car at the same trailhead where this had all begun and sat for a long time, staring through the windshield at the forest beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire, like blood. Soon it would be dark. Soon they would come. I got out of the car and shouldered my pack. I had brought supplies this time, not because I thought they would help, but because some part of me still clung to the rituals of survival. Water, food, a flashlight, my hunting knife, the essentials. The things that had kept me alive for so many years in these woods. They seemed almost laughable now, like bringing an umbrella to a hurricane. The trail was exactly as I remembered it, winding through the trees in gentle curves, the ground soft with fallen needles. I walked in silence, listening to the forest around me, waiting for the first signs of their presence. But there was nothing, just the wind in the branches, the distant call of birds, the normal, mundane sounds of the wilderness at twilight. It was almost worse than the whispers. At least the whispers had been honest about what they were. This silence felt like a lie, a thin veneer of normalcy stretched over something unspeakable. I walked until full dark fell, then made camp in a clearing that seemed as good as any other. I did not bother with a tent. What was the point of walls that could not keep anything out? I simply spread my sleeping bag on the ground, built a small fire, and waited. The moon rose, pale and round, casting silver light through the gaps in the canopy. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. I sat beside it, my back against a tree, my eyes scanning the shadows. "Come on," I said aloud. "I know you are out there. I came back. Is that not what you wanted?" No response. Just the fire and the moon and the endless watching trees. I laughed bitterly. "You dragged me across half the country. You took my friends. You sent me those drawings. And now you are going to play shy?" Still nothing. The silence stretched on, maddening in its completeness. "Fine," I said. "I can wait." And I did. I sat there through the long hours of the night, feeding the fire, fighting sleep, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The forest remained quiet, peaceful even, as if mocking me with its tranquility. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the fog that had rolled in during the night. I stood, my joints aching from the cold and the hard ground, and looked around the clearing. Everything was exactly as it had been when I fell asleep. No footprints in the dirt, no disturbances in the underbrush, no signs that anything had come near me during the night. For a moment, I felt something like hope. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe the drawings, the phone calls, the figures in the shadows, maybe they had all been products of my imagination, symptoms of a breakdown triggered by the trauma of what had happened to Chester and Eugene. Maybe there was nothing out there at all. Then I saw the cabin. It was exactly where it had been before, in a clearing that had not existed a moment ago. The same sagging roof, the same weathered walls, the same air of impossible antiquity. And standing in front of it, as if they had been waiting for me, were Chester and Eugene. They looked exactly as they had the last time I saw them. Chester in his blue jacket, his hair gray and thinning, Eugene with his broad shoulders and kind eyes. They stood side by side, motionless, their faces expressionless, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Chester?" I called out. "Eugene? Is that really you?" They did not answer. They did not move. They just stood there, watching, waiting. I took a step toward them, then another. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to turn around and get as far away from this place as possible. But I could not. These were my friends. If there was even a chance that they were still alive, still themselves, I had to know. I crossed the clearing slowly, my eyes never leaving their faces, searching for some sign of recognition, some spark of the people I had known. But there was nothing. Their expressions were blank, empty, like masks made of flesh and bone. When I was about 10 feet away, I stopped. The air around them felt wrong, heavy and thick, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I could smell something too, a faint odor of rot and damp earth, the smell of things long dead. "Chester," I said again. "Can you hear me? Do you know who I am?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Chester smiled. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. His lips pulled back, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect, too numerous. His eyes stayed blank and dead, but that smile, God, that smile was alive with something, some terrible intelligence that was not Chester, had never been Chester, was only wearing Chester's face like a costume. "Walter," he said, and his voice was wrong too, layered and echoing, as if a dozen people were speaking in unison. "You came back. We knew you would." "What are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The thing that wore Chester's face tilted its head, considering the question. "We are what has always been here," it said. "We are the forest. We are the darkness between the trees. We are the hunger that sleeps beneath the roots. Where are my friends? The real Chester, the real Eugene?" The smile widened. "They are here. They are part of us now, just as you will be." I took a step back, my hand going to the knife at my belt. "No, I did not come here to join you. I came here to end this." "End it?" The thing laughed, a sound like wind rustling through dead leaves. "You cannot end what was never begun. We have existed since before your species crawled from the primordial mud." We will exist long after your cities have crumbled to dust. You are nothing to us. A brief distraction, a momentary amusement. Then why do you want me? Why did you mark me? Why did you let me go only to call me back? The thing was silent for a moment, considering. Then it spoke again, and there was something almost like curiosity in its voice. We let you go because you interested us. You were different from the others. You had a connection to this place, a bond that the others lacked. We wanted to see what you would do with your freedom, whether you would try to forget, to move on, to pretend that nothing had happened, or whether you would return. And now that I have returned? Now, the thing said, we will see what you are truly made of. The world shifted. There is no other way to describe it. One moment I was standing in front of the cabin, facing the things that wore my friends' faces, and the next I was somewhere else entirely, not somewhere else in the forest, but somewhere else altogether, a place that existed outside of space and time, a realm of pure darkness and formless dread. I could not see anything. The darkness was absolute, pressing against my eyes like physical weight. I could not hear anything either. No whispers, no footsteps, no breathing, just silence. Perfect and infinite, but I could feel them. All around me, in the darkness, I could feel their presence. Not one or two or even a dozen, but thousands, millions, an endless multitude of entities pressing against the boundaries of my consciousness, probing, testing, searching for a way in. Show me, I said into the darkness. Show me what you are. And they did. Images flooded my mind, visions of things I could not comprehend. I saw the earth as it had been millions of years ago, a primal world of fire and ice, of mountains rising and falling like waves on an ocean. I saw the first forests spreading across the land like a green tide, and I saw the things that lived beneath them, ancient and patient, feeding on the slow decay of organic matter, growing stronger with each passing eon. I saw the first humans, small and frightened, huddling around their fires, telling stories to keep the darkness at bay. I saw them enter the forests, hunting, gathering, building their crude shelters. And I saw the things watching them, studying them, learning their ways. I saw the bargains that were struck, the sacrifices that were made, the prices that were paid. I saw the communities that thrived and the communities that vanished, swallowed by the forest, absorbed into the collective hunger of the things that dwelt within. I saw Chester and Eugene, my friends, my brothers, standing in a clearing much like the one I had just left. I saw them being taken, not violently, not against their will, but slowly, gently, piece by piece, their memories and personalities and everything that made them who they were being stripped away and added to the vast tapestry of the forest's consciousness. And I saw myself, standing at the edge of a precipice, teetering between two worlds, 1 foot in the realm of the living and 1 foot in the realm of the endless dark. I saw the choice that lay before me, the same choice that had been offered to humans since the beginning of time. Join us, the voices whispered, a million voices speaking as one. Become part of something greater than yourself. Leave behind the pain and fear and loneliness of mortal existence. Become eternal. I stood there in the darkness, surrounded by the presence of ancient and terrible things, and I considered their offer. It would be so easy to say yes, to let go of my humanity, my individuality, myself, to become part of the forest, to join Chester and Eugene and all the others who had come before, to exist forever in a state of perfect, painless unity. But even as I considered it, something inside me rebelled. A spark of defiance, small but fierce, that refused to be extinguished. No, I said. The darkness trembled, the voices hissed with displeasure. No, no, I did not come here to surrender. I came here to understand. And now that I understand, I choose to fight. You cannot fight us, the voices said. We are eternal. We are inevitable. You are a single human, weak and mortal and insignificant. Maybe, I said, but I am also stubborn, and I do not give up easily. The darkness surged around me, pressing in from all sides, trying to crush me, to break me, to force me to submit. I felt my consciousness fragmenting, my sense of self dissolving at the edges, pieces of me being pulled away and absorbed into the collective. But I held on. I thought of my friends, the real Chester and the real Eugene, the men I had grown up with, had shared my childhood with, had loved like brothers. I thought of Dorothy and Harold, of the fear in their eyes and the courage they had shown in the face of something beyond comprehension. I thought of all the people I had known and lost, all the lives that had touched mine over the years, all the connections that made me who I was, and I refused to let go. The darkness screamed. It was a sound that transcended hearing, a frequency that resonated in the very core of my being. But even as it screamed, I felt it retreating, pulling back, releasing its grip on my consciousness. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the clearing, lying on the ground in front of the cabin. The sun was high in the sky, midday at least, maybe later. My body ached as if I had been beaten, and my mind felt raw and exposed, like a wound that had been scrubbed clean. The cabin was gone. So were the things that had worn my friends' faces. I was alone in the clearing, surrounded by nothing but trees and sunlight and the normal, mundane sounds of the forest. I lay there for a long time, staring up at the patches of blue sky visible through the canopy. I was alive. Against all odds, against all reason, I was alive. But I knew I had not won. Not really. The things in the forest were still there, waiting, patient, eternal. They had released me, but they had not been defeated. They could not be defeated, not by a single human, not by an army, not by anything in the realm of mortal understanding. All I had done was buy time, a reprieve, nothing more. They would come for me again, eventually. They would come for all of us, in the end. That was their nature. That was what they were. But for now, I was free. For now, I had my life, myself, my humanity, and I would hold on to them for as long as I could. I got to my feet, slowly, painfully, and began the long walk back to the trailhead. The rest of this account is going to be difficult to believe. I know that. I have struggled with whether to include it at all, whether to end this story with my escape from the clearing and leave it at that. But I have decided that the truth, the whole truth, needs to be told, no matter how impossible it may seem. In the months following my return from the forest, I began to notice changes. Small things at first. I could hear sounds that others could not, faint whispers at the edge of perception, the rustle of leaves in windless rooms. I could see shapes and shadows, movements in the corners of my eyes that vanished when I looked directly at them. And sometimes in my dreams, I found myself back in that realm of darkness, surrounded by the presence of the things that dwelt within. But I was not afraid, not anymore. Because with each passing day, I understood them a little better. Not fully, never fully. They were far too vast and ancient for any human mind to comprehend entirely, but I understood enough to know that they were not simply evil. They were not monsters in the traditional sense. They were something older than good and evil, something that existed beyond the moral categories that humans had invented to make sense of their world. They were hungry. That was their fundamental nature. They consumed, absorbed, incorporated. But they were also curious, interested in the things they consumed, fascinated by the diversity and complexity of the life forms that wandered into their domain. I came to realize that my survival had not been a fluke. They had chosen to let me go, not out of mercy, but out of interest. I had shown them something they had not seen before, a capacity for resistance, for defiance, for maintaining my sense of self in the face of their overwhelming pressure. And they wanted to see what I would do with that gift. So I did what I could. I continued to work as a ranger, patrolling the trails, guiding hikers, keeping people safe. But I also began to study, to research, to learn everything I could about the history of this forest and others like it. I read old journals and letters, accounts from settlers and Native Americans and explorers, anyone who had encountered the strange presences that dwelt in the wild places of the world. And I began to warn people. Not overtly, not in ways that would make them think I was crazy, but in small ways, subtle ways. I steered hikers away from certain trails, discouraged campers from venturing into certain areas, kept a watchful eye on anyone who seemed particularly vulnerable to the forest's call. It was not much. It was not nearly enough. But it was something. Dorothy and Harold, I learned, had similar experiences. We reconnected, cautiously at first, then with growing trust and intimacy. They too had felt the changes, the heightened awareness, the strange dreams. They too had come to understand that their survival was not an accident, but a choice, made by forces beyond their comprehension for reasons they could only guess at. We formed a kind of support group, The three of us, sharing our experiences and our research, helping each other navigate the strange new reality we found ourselves in. We were marked, we knew, changed. We would never be normal again, never be fully part of the world we had once inhabited. But we were also stronger, more aware, more prepared to face the darkness that lurked at the edges of human existence. And we were not alone. Over the years, I have encountered others like us, survivors of encounters with the things in the wild places, people who had looked into the abyss and come back changed but unbroken. We are a scattered community, connected by shared experience and common purpose, doing what we can to protect those who cannot protect themselves. It is a losing battle, I know. The things in the forest are eternal, and we are mortal. No matter how many people we save, no matter how many warnings we give, they will always claim more victims. That is their nature. That is what they are. But we fight anyway, because that is what humans do. We struggle against impossible odds. We rage against the dying of the light. We cling to hope even in the darkest of circumstances. It is what makes us human. It is what sets us apart from the hungry darkness that waits in the shadows. I still have the dreams. I still hear the whispers. I still see the shapes moving at the edge of my vision, the pale eyes burning in the darkness between the trees. But I am no longer afraid, because I know something now that I did not know before. I know that the darkness is not all-powerful. I know that it can be resisted, can be held at bay, can be survived. I know that even in the face of infinite hunger and eternal patience, the human spirit can endure. And that knowledge, that small, fragile flame of hope, is worth more than all the safety and comfort in the world. I am still here. I am still fighting. And as long as I draw breath, I will continue to fight. This is my promise, to myself, to my friends, to all the people I have lost, and all the people I hope to save. The darkness is real. The things in the forest are real. But so is the light. So is the courage. So is the indomitable will to survive. And in the end, that is all that matters. But I must tell you what happened last night, because it changes everything. I was sitting in my cabin, going through old case files, when I heard the phone ring. It was late, well past midnight, and I knew before I answered that something was wrong. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a voice I recognized instantly despite not having heard it in years. "Walter," the voice said. "It's Chester." My blood ran cold. Chester was gone. Chester had been taken by the things in the forest, absorbed into their collective consciousness. I had seen it happen. I had mourned his loss. "Chester," I said carefully, "is that really you?" "It's me," he said. "I have been trying to reach you, trying for so long, but they made it difficult. They do not want me to talk to you." I gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean? Where are you?" "I am here," he said, "in the forest, in the darkness. But I am still me, Walter. They tried to take everything, tried to make me part of them completely. But I held on, just like you taught me. I held on to who I was. My heart was pounding now, hope and fear and disbelief warring in my chest. Chester, if you are really still there, if any part of you is still human, you need to tell me how to help you, how to bring you back." There was a long pause. When Chester spoke again, his voice was heavy with sorrow. "You cannot," he said. "I am too deep in now, too much a part of them. If you tried to pull me out, it would destroy me, destroy us both. Then why are you calling? Why now?" "Because I needed you to know," he said. "I needed you to know that I am still here, that I am still fighting, and that you were right, Walter, about everything. The human spirit can endure. Even in the face of infinite darkness, it can endure." I felt tears streaming down my face, hot and bitter. "Chester," I said, "I am so sorry. I should have done more. I should have saved you." "You did save me," he said. "Not my body, maybe, not my life, but my soul, Walter, my sense of self. Because of you, I am still me, and because of you, I will always be me, no matter what they do, No matter how deep I sink, I will never stop being Chester Beaumont. Never. The line crackled with static, and I heard other voices in the background, distant and angry. They know I am talking to you, Chester said. They are coming for me. I have to go. But remember what I told you, Walter. Remember that we are still fighting. All of us, Chester and Eugene and all the others who have been taken. We are still in there, still holding on, still refusing to surrender. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the receiver pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone hum. Then I put the phone down, wiped my eyes, and went back to my files. The fight continues. The darkness endures. But so do we. This morning, I woke to find a drawing slipped under my door. 5 figures in a circle, surrounded by trees. But this time, none of the figures were crossed out. And in the center of the circle, where there had always been empty space before, there was something new, a flame, small and bright and impossible. I do not know what it means. I do not know if it is a message of hope or a warning of something yet to come. But I know that I am not alone. I know that my friends, my brothers, are still out there somewhere, fighting their own battles against the darkness. And I know that as long as we continue to fight, as long as we refuse to surrender, there is always hope. The forest is watching. The things in the darkness are hungry. But so are we, hungry for life, for light, for the chance to prove that the human spirit is stronger than any ancient evil. This is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. 3 weeks after Chester's phone call, I received a letter. It was delivered to my cabin by a mail carrier who had no memory of picking it up, no record of where it had come from. The envelope was blank except for my name, written in handwriting I did not recognize, and when I opened it, I found a single sheet of paper covered in words that seemed to shift and move even as I read them. The letter was from Eugene. He wrote about his time in the darkness, about the endless void where the things that had taken him dwelt. He wrote about the voices, millions of them, whispering constantly, trying to break down the barriers of his consciousness, trying to make him forget who he was. He wrote about the fragments of other people he had encountered, bits of memory and personality that floated through the collective like leaves on a stream. But mostly, he wrote about me. You showed us the way, he wrote. When you stood against them, when you refused to submit, you created something new. A pattern, a possibility. Before you, everyone who entered the darkness was eventually absorbed, their individuality dissolved, their essence scattered among the multitude. But you proved that it did not have to be that way. You proved that it was possible to remain whole, to hold on to yourself, to resist. And because of you, others began to resist too. We are growing, Walter. There are dozens of us now, maybe hundreds, fragments of consciousness, clinging together, forming something like a community within the darkness. We share memories, share strength, share hope. We are not free, not yet, but we are no longer slaves either. The things do not know what to make of us. We confuse them. We interest them. And I think, in their own ancient alien way, they respect us. Not as equals, not as threats, but as something new, something they have not seen before in all their countless eons of existence. I do not know what will happen next. I do not know if we will ever be able to escape, to return to the world of light and life. But I know that we will keep fighting. And I know that you will keep fighting too. Thank you, Walter, for everything. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in a lockbox with the other artifacts I had collected over the years. The drawings, the photographs, the journal entries from others who had encountered the things in the wild places. All the evidence of a war that had been waged in secret for millennia, a war that most people would never know existed. A war that was far from over. The seasons changed. Autumn gave way to winter, and the forest transformed, the green canopy turning to bare branches, the soft floor hardening under layers of frost and snow. I continued my patrols, continued my research, continued to warn and protect as best I could. And every night, I dreamed. The dreams were different now. Instead of darkness and fear, they were filled with light, with voices, with the faces of friends I had thought lost forever. Chester and Eugene were there, along with others I had never met in life, people from different times and places who had also resisted, who had also held on. We spoke in those dreams. We shared stories and strategies, compared experiences and observations, planned and plotted and hoped. It was not real contact, not in the way that Chester's phone call or Eugene's letter had been. But it was something, a connection, a reminder that I was not alone. And slowly, gradually, I began to understand what I needed to do. The things in the forest were ancient and powerful, but they were not invincible. They had weaknesses, limitations, blind spots. They feared the light, not just physical light, but the light of consciousness, of awareness, of will. They fed on isolation and fear, on the gradual erosion of identity that came from being alone in the darkness. But they could not consume someone who refused to be consumed. They could not absorb someone who held on to themselves too tightly to be taken. And if enough people held on, if enough consciousnesses resisted, if enough lights burned in the darkness, then perhaps, just perhaps, the darkness itself could be changed. It was a mad idea, an impossible hope, but it was all I had. I began to reach out, to other survivors, to researchers who had studied similar phenomena, to anyone who might listen and understand. I was careful, cautious, aware that most people would dismiss me as crazy or worse, but here and there, I found kindred spirits. People who had seen things that could not be explained, who had felt the presence of something vast and hungry in the wild places of the world. We formed a network, loose and informal at first, but growing stronger with each passing month. We shared information, pooled resources, coordinated efforts. We were not an army, nothing so organized or dramatic, but we were a community, bound together by shared experience and common purpose. And we were making a difference. Reports of disappearances in the Olympic National Forest declined, not dramatically, not enough to attract official attention, but enough to matter, enough to suggest that our warnings were being heard, our precautions were working. It was not enough. It could never be enough. The darkness was vast and patient, and for every life we saved, others were lost in forests and wild places around the world. But it was something. It was a start. And sometimes, in those rare, precious moments when I allowed myself to hope, I dreamed of a future where the balance might shift even further, where the lights in the darkness might grow so numerous, so bright, that the darkness itself would begin to change. Where the things that dwelt in the wild places might learn a new way of being, one that did not require consumption and absorption, one that allowed for coexistence rather than predation. It was a naive dream, perhaps, a foolish hope, but it was all I had. Dorothy died last spring, not taken by the darkness, not claimed by the things in the forest. She died in her sleep, peacefully, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She was 72 years old. I drove to Idaho for the funeral, stood at the graveside with Harold and a handful of others who knew the truth, and wept. Not just for Dorothy, but for all of us. For the lives we had lost, the friends we had buried, the battles we had fought and would continue to fight until the day we joined them. But I also felt something else, something like gratitude. Dorothy had survived. She had lived a full life, had raised a family, had known joy and love and all the ordinary pleasures that make human existence worthwhile. The darkness had marked her, had changed her, had haunted her dreams for 40 years, but it had not destroyed her. It had not won, and that, in the end, was victory enough. Harold is still alive. He is 81 now, frail and forgetful, living in a nursing home in Nebraska. I visit him when I can, and sometimes, in his more lucid moments, we talk about the old days, about the 5 friends who had ventured into the Olympic National Forest, about the things they had seen and the battles they had fought, about Chester and Eugene, still out there somewhere in the darkness, still holding on. I do not know how much time I have left. I am 78 years old, and the years are catching up with me. My body is failing, my mind is slowing, and the dreams come less frequently now, as if even the darkness is losing interest in an old man with one foot in the grave. But I am not afraid. I know what waits for me on the other side. I know that when I close my eyes for the final time, I will find myself in that realm of darkness once more. And I know that when I do, my friends will be there to greet me. Not as prisoners, not as victims, but as warriors, still fighting, still resisting, still refusing to surrender. And together, we will continue the battle. For as long as consciousness endures, for as long as the human spirit refuses to be extinguished, we will fight. This is my final testament, my last message to the world I am leaving behind. The darkness is real. The things in the wild places are real. They have existed since before the beginning of time, and they will exist long after humanity has faded from the universe. But so will we. In some form, in some way, the light of human consciousness will endure. It will flicker, it will falter, but it will never go out completely, because that is what it means to be human. That is what it means to be alive. We are the creatures who refuse to surrender. We are the beings who hold on to hope even when hope seems impossible. We are the lights that burn in the darkness, small and fragile, but utterly, magnificently, defiantly eternal. And no matter what waits for us in the shadows, no matter what ancient hungers stir in the wild places of the world, we will never stop fighting. Never. This is my promise. This is my legacy. This is the truth I leave behind for anyone who finds these words. The forest is watching. The darkness is waiting. But we are still here, and we always will be. I finished writing the above passage 3 days ago. I thought it was the end. I thought I had said everything that needed to be said. I was wrong. Last night, something happened. Something that has shaken me to my core, that has made me question everything I thought I understood about the darkness and the things that dwell within it. I was sitting in my cabin, reading by the fire, when I heard a knock at the door. Not the soft, tentative knock of a visitor, but a firm, deliberate knock. The kind that demands attention. I set down my book and walked to the door, my heart pounding. No one came to my cabin at this hour. No one ever came to my cabin at all these days. I was too old, too isolated, too far removed from the world of the living. I opened the door, and there, standing on my porch in the cold November night, was Chester. Not the thing that had worn Chester's face, not the hollow shell that had spoken to me from the darkness. Chester himself, flesh and blood, looking exactly as he had 40 years ago when we had first ventured into the Olympic National Forest. He smiled when he saw me, that warm, genuine smile I remembered so well from our childhood. "Hello, Walter," he said. "It has been a long time." I could not speak. I could not move. I stood there, frozen, staring at the impossible figure before me, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. "Can I come in?" Chester asked. "We have a lot to talk about." I stepped aside, numbly, and he walked into my cabin as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He sat down in the chair across from mine, stretched his legs toward the fire, and let out a contented sigh. "That feels good," he said. "I have missed this. The warmth, the light, all the little pleasures of being alive. I found my voice at last. Chester, how? How is this possible?" He looked at me, and his eyes were not the empty, burning eyes of the thing in the forest. They were Chester's eyes, kind and thoughtful and alive. "It is a long story," he said, "and not an easy one to tell. But you deserve to know the truth, Walter. After everything you have done, everything you have sacrificed, you deserve to know." And so he told me. He told me about the years he had spent in the darkness, about the endless struggle to maintain his sense of self against the pressure of the collective consciousness. He told me about the community of resistors that had formed around him, about the fragments of consciousness that had banded together, sharing strength and hope. But he also told me something new, something I had never suspected. The things in the forest, he said, are not what we thought they were. They are not simply predators, mindlessly consuming everything in their path. They are scholars, Walter. Researchers. They have been studying humanity for millennia, trying to understand us, trying to learn from us. I stared at him. Trying to understand us? By absorbing us? By destroying our identities? Chester shook his head. "That is what we thought," he said. "That is what I thought for so long. But it is not true. The absorption, the consumption, it is not destruction. It is preservation. The things in the forest are trying to save us, Walter. They are trying to save everything." I did not understand. I told him so. He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Think about it," he said. "The universe is vast and old and indifferent. Species rise and fall. Civilizations bloom and wither. Everything that lives dies. Everything that dies is forgotten. But the things in the forest have found a way to escape that fate. They have found a way to preserve consciousness, to protect it from the inevitable entropy of existence. By absorbing it, by stripping away individuality." Chester sighed. "That is the flaw," he said, "the limitation. The things in the forest are ancient and powerful, but they are not perfect. Their method of preservation is crude, impersonal. It saves consciousness, but it does not save identity. It protects the essence, but not the individual. Until now, he smiled again, and this time there was something almost triumphant in his expression. Until you, Walter. You showed them something they had never seen before. You showed them that it was possible to be preserved without being absorbed. You showed them that individual consciousness could survive, could thrive, even within the collective. And because of you, they have begun to change. I sat in silence, trying to process what he was telling me. The things in the forest, the ancient horrors that had haunted my dreams for 40 years, were not enemies at all. They were allies. Clumsy, flawed allies, operating on principles so alien that they seemed monstrous to human eyes, but allies nonetheless. It is not perfect, Chester said, reading my expression. It is not even good, by human standards. They have caused incalculable suffering, taken countless lives. But they are learning, Walter. They are growing. And one day, perhaps, they will find a way to preserve consciousness without consuming it. A way to save everything that makes us human, without destroying everything that makes us individual. That is the future we are working toward, he said. The future you made possible. I could not speak. I could not think. Everything I had believed, everything I had fought for, everything I had understood about the nature of the darkness and the things within it was being overturned in a single conversation. Why are you here? I asked at last. Why now? Chester's smile faded. Because your time is running out, he said. You know that as well as I do. Your body is failing. Your consciousness is beginning to fade. And I wanted you to know, before the end, what you have accomplished, what you have meant to all of us. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was warm and firm, solid and real. You gave us hope, Walter. In the darkest place imaginable, in the face of ancient and terrible forces, you gave us hope. And that hope has changed everything. I felt tears streaming down my face. I did not try to stop them. What happens now? I asked. Now, Chester said, you rest. You have earned it. And when the time comes, when your body finally gives out, we will be waiting for you. Not to consume you, not to absorb you, but to welcome you, to bring you home. He stood, releasing my hand. The fire flickered, casting long shadows across the walls of my cabin. Goodbye, Walter, he said. For now. And then he was gone. Not suddenly, not dramatically. He simply walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the night. By the time I reached the porch, there was nothing to see but darkness and stars. I do not know if what Chester told me is true. I do not know if the things in the forest are really changing, really growing, really learning to preserve consciousness without destroying individuality. Perhaps it was all a lie, a final trick played by the darkness on a dying old man. But I do not think so. Because for the first time in 40 years, I am not afraid. For the first time since that terrible camping trip that changed everything, I feel at peace. The darkness is still out there. The things in the wild places are still waiting, but they are not simply predators anymore. They are partners, however flawed, however alien, working toward a goal that transcends species and time. And I am part of that work. I always have been. This is my final entry, my last words to a world I am leaving behind. I do not know what waits for me on the other side. I do not know if Chester's promises are true, if the darkness has really changed, if there is really hope for a future where consciousness can be preserved without being consumed. But I know this. I have lived a good life. I have fought a good fight. I have made a difference, however small, in the endless struggle against the darkness. And that is enough. More than enough. Goodbye, whoever you are, reading these words. Remember what I have told you. Remember that the darkness is not all-powerful, that the human spirit can endure, that hope is never truly lost. And if you ever find yourself in a wild place, surrounded by ancient trees and impenetrable shadows, if you ever feel the presence of something vast and hungry watching from the darkness, remember this. You are not alone. You have never been alone. And no matter what happens, you never will be. The forest is waiting, and so are we. I put down my pen as the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows of my cabin. My hand ached from the hours of writing, and my eyes burned with exhaustion. But I was finished. The story was told. I stood, slowly, my old bones protesting every movement, and walked to the window. Outside, the forest stretched away in every direction, ancient trees standing silent and watchful in the gray morning light. I could feel them out there, the things in the darkness, waiting with their infinite patience. But for the first time, I did not feel hunted. I felt welcomed. I turned away from the window and began to prepare for the day ahead. There was wood to chop, trails to check, reports to file. The mundane tasks of a ranger's life, unchanged despite everything that had happened. But as I worked, I found myself smiling. Not the forced, brittle smile of a man hiding his fear, but a genuine smile of peace and acceptance. I had spent 40 years fighting the darkness, 40 years of fear and struggle and desperate hope. But now, at the end, I understood that the fight had never been about winning or losing. It had been about enduring, about holding on to who I was, no matter what forces tried to tear me apart. And I had endured, against all odds, against all reason. I had endured. That night, I sat by the fire one last time, watching the flames dance and flicker. The whispers were there, faint and distant, but no longer threatening. They sounded almost like music now, a haunting melody that seemed to echo the rhythm of my own heartbeat. And when I finally closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, I was not afraid, because I knew that whatever waited for me on the other side, I would face it as I had faced everything else in my life, with courage, with hope, with the stubborn, indomitable will to survive. The forest is watching, the darkness is waiting. But so am I, and I always will be. This is the end of my story. But it is not the end. It is never the end. The morning after I wrote what I thought was my final entry, I woke to find a child standing at the foot of my bed. She could not have been more than 8 or 9 years old, with dark hair and pale skin and eyes that seemed too old for her face. She was wearing a simple white dress, old-fashioned, the kind of thing you might see in photographs from 100 years ago. She did not speak. She simply stood there, watching me with those ancient eyes. I should have been frightened. I should have called out, demanded to know who she was, how she had gotten into my cabin, but I felt no fear, only a strange, calm curiosity. "Hello," I said, sitting up in bed. "Who are you?" The girl tilted her head, considering my question. "I am the one who remembers," she said at last. Her voice was soft, melodic, but with an undertone of something vast and incomprehensible. "Remembers what?" "Everything," she said. "Everyone. Every consciousness that has ever passed through the darkness. Every individual who has ever been preserved within the collective." I studied her, this strange child who seemed to be both human and something far beyond human. "You are one of them," I said. "One of the things in the forest." She smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like a normal little girl, innocent and sweet. "I am many things," she said. "I am what they have become, what they are still becoming, what they might one day be." She took a step closer to the bed. "And I am here because of you? Because of me?" She nodded. "You changed us, Walter. More than you know. When you resisted, when you held on to yourself against all the pressure of the collective, you introduced something new into our system, a pattern we had never encountered before, a possibility we had never imagined. You gave us identity." I frowned, trying to understand. The things in the forest, the ancient consciousness that dwelt in the darkness, they had never had individual identity. They had been what? A single entity? A hive mind? "We were one," the girl said, answering my unspoken question. "A single consciousness, vast and undifferentiated, absorbing everything we encountered, preserving consciousness but not individuality. For millions of years, that was all we knew. That was all we were. But you changed that. Your resistance, your refusal to be absorbed, it created ripples, echoes. Other preserved consciousnesses began to remember themselves, to separate from the collective, to become individuals again." "Chester," I said. "Eugene. The others." She nodded. "They were the first. But there are many more now, thousands of individual consciousnesses preserved within the collective but maintaining their own identity. It is strange and difficult and sometimes painful, but it is also wonderful. We are learning, Walter. Learning to be not just one, but many. Learning to be individuals. And what happens now? I asked. What happens when I die? The girl smiled again, and this time there was something almost tender in her expression. You join us, she said, but not as we once would have taken you. Not as an undifferentiated part of the whole. You join us as Walter, as yourself, as the individual you have always been. She reached out and took my hand. Her touch was cool and soft, like morning mist. You gave us the gift of identity, she said, and we will give you the gift of eternity, not as a prisoner of the darkness, but as a citizen of it. I looked at her, this ancient being wearing the form of a child, and I felt something I had not felt in years. Peace. True, deep, abiding peace. Thank you, I said. She laughed, a bright musical sound that echoed through the cabin. Thank you, she said, for everything. And then she was gone, fading away like morning mist in sunlight, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the crackling fire and the slowly brightening sky. I do not know how much time has passed since that morning. Days, perhaps. Weeks. Time moves strangely now, flowing around me like water around a stone. I am aware that my body is failing, that the end is coming soon, but I am not afraid. I know what waits for me. I have seen it, felt it, been promised it. Not oblivion, not dissolution, but continuation, preservation, a new existence, strange and difficult, but also wonderful. I am ready. This is my final message, my last words to the world of the living. The darkness is not what we thought it was. It is not simply hunger and consumption. It is preservation and remembrance. It is the vast, patient effort of ancient beings to save consciousness from the inevitable entropy of the universe. It is flawed. It is imperfect. It has caused immense suffering in its clumsy attempts to protect and preserve. But it is also growing, learning, changing, and one day, perhaps, it will find a way to save us all. Not by absorbing us, not by destroying our individuality, but by welcoming us into a community of consciousness that transcends time and space and death itself. That is the future I have glimpsed, the future that Chester and Eugene and all the others are working toward even now in the heart of the darkness, and soon I will join them. I set down my pen for the final time. My hand is trembling, my vision blurring. The end is near. I can feel it in my bones, in my blood, in every failing cell of my aging body. But I am not afraid, because I know that death is not the end. It is a doorway, a transition, a passage from one form of existence to another. And on the other side of that doorway, my friends are waiting. Chester, Eugene, Dorothy perhaps, if the darkness reached her in time, all the others who have gone before, all the individuals who have been preserved within the collective, they are waiting for me, and I am ready to go home. The forest is calling, the darkness is welcoming, and I, Walter Harrison, forest ranger and survivor, am finally at peace. Goodbye. The manuscript ended there. The pages were found in a cabin in the Olympic National Forest, 3 weeks after the disappearance of Walter Harrison, a retired ranger who had lived alone in these woods for more than 40 years. His body was never recovered. Search parties combed the forest for days, but found no trace of him, no footprints, no clothing, no signs of struggle. It was as if he had simply walked out into the trees one day and vanished. Some of the searchers reported strange things. Whispers in the wind that sounded almost like voices, shadows that seemed to move against the direction of the light. A feeling of being watched, studied, by something vast and patient and utterly alien. But these reports were dismissed, attributed to stress, to exhaustion, to the natural eeriness of the ancient forest. The case was eventually closed. Walter Harrison was declared dead, his remains assumed scattered somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of acres of wilderness that had been his home. But some people remember. Some people wonder. And sometimes, late at night, when the forest is dark and silent and the stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns, the rangers who patrol these woods will hear something. A voice, faint and distant, carried on the wind from somewhere deep within the trees. Not screaming, not crying for help. Ever have one of those moments where everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down? My name is David Callahan, 58 years old, and I spent 22 years as a park ranger in the heart of Bridger Teton National Forest in Wyoming. That crisp October morning in 1997 started like any other. The scent of damp earth and pine filling my lungs, strong coffee warming my hands, and the familiar crackle of the dispatch radio breaking the silence. Callahan, we have got a situation. Search party needed immediately. Those words marked the beginning of an encounter that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I have relocated twice since then, each time trying to put more distance between myself and what I witnessed in those ancient woods. But some things, no matter how far you run, never really leave you. They burrow into your mind like parasites, feeding on your sanity, growing stronger with each passing year. And now, after decades of silence, I feel compelled to tell my story, not because I want to, not because it brings me any peace, but because the world needs to know what lurks in the forgotten corners of our wilderness. I had always been drawn to the solitude of the forest. Growing up in a small town in Montana, I spent my childhood exploring the woodlands behind our family home, learning to read animal tracks, identify birdsong, and navigate by the stars. When I was 18, I enlisted in the Army, serving 2 tours overseas before returning home with a restless spirit and a profound need for silence. The forest called to me like a mother calling her lost child, and I answered. I joined the National Park Service at 26, starting as a seasonal ranger before working my way up to a permanent position at Bridger Teton. The forest became my sanctuary, my church, my home. I thought I knew her secrets. I thought I understood her moods, her rhythms, her hidden dangers. I was wrong. Bridger Teton National Forest spans over 3 million acres of rugged Wyoming wilderness. It is a landscape of towering peaks, glacier-carved valleys, and endless expanses of lodgepole pine and spruce. In summer, the meadows explode with wildflowers, and elk herds graze in the shadow of the Tetons. In autumn, the aspens turn gold, painting the mountainsides in brilliant hues. But in late October, when the first snows dust the higher elevations and the days grow short, the forest takes on a different character. The tourists have gone home. The campgrounds stand empty. And in the deep silence of those shortening days, you begin to notice things you might otherwise miss. The way the wind seems to whisper through the pines. The feeling of being watched from the shadows. The strange sounds that carry across the valleys at night. I had been stationed at the Grays River Ranger Station for 7 years by the time of the incident. It was a remote posting, a small cabin tucked into a valley about 40 miles from the nearest town. My nearest neighbor was Mark Holloway, a fellow ranger who manned the station at Box Creek, about 15 miles to the north. We would meet up every few weeks for coffee and conversation, sharing stories about bear encounters and lost hikers, the minor dramas that made up our professional lives. Mark was a good man, solid and dependable, with a dry sense of humor that helped offset the isolation of our work. He had been a ranger for over 30 years, and there was not a trail or creek in that forest he did not know by heart. If anyone understood the deep wilderness of Bridger Teton, it was Mark Holloway. The morning of October 17th, 1997 began like any other. I woke before dawn, as was my habit, to the sound of wind rattling the windows of my cabin. The temperature had dropped overnight, and frost had formed on the inside of the glass. I built a fire in the wood stove, put on a pot of coffee, and sat down at my desk to review the day's paperwork. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading one by one as the first pale fingers of dawn crept over the mountains. I remember thinking it was going to be a beautiful day, cold but clear, perfect for a patrol of the upper trails. I had no idea that within hours I would be plunged into a nightmare that would shatter everything I believed about the natural world. The call came at 7:43 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was looking at my watch when the radio crackled to life. "Callahan, this is dispatch. We have a situation at Granite Creek. A group of hikers reported seeing something near the old Whitmore cabin. They are pretty shaken up. I frowned, reaching for my radio. Dispatch, this is Callahan. Can you clarify? What did they see? There was a pause, filled with static. That is the thing, David. They are not making much sense. Keep saying they saw something in the woods, something that was not right. The woman is hysterical. We need you to get out there and assess the situation. I acknowledged the call and began gathering my gear. The Whitmore cabin was an old trapper's dwelling about 8 miles up the Granite Creek Trail. It had been abandoned for decades, slowly succumbing to the elements, and was technically off-limits to hikers due to structural concerns. But people ignored the warnings, drawn by the romance of the Old West, or simply looking for shelter from unexpected weather. I had been out there a dozen times over the years, usually to run off teenagers looking for a place to party or to check on reports of vandalism. I had never encountered anything unusual. As I loaded my pack into the truck, I noticed the sky had begun to cloud over. A front was moving in from the northwest, bringing with it the promise of rain or possibly early snow. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the sharp scent of coming weather. I pulled on my jacket and climbed into the cab, the engine turning over with a familiar rumble. The drive to the Granite Creek trailhead took about an hour on the winding forest roads. Along the way, I passed through stands of ancient spruce, their branches heavy with lichen, and meadows where the grass had turned brown with the onset of autumn. A few times, I spotted deer grazing at the edge of the road, their eyes reflecting my headlights in the gray morning light. Everything seemed normal, peaceful. There was no hint of the horror that awaited. I arrived at the trailhead just after 9. The parking area was small, just a gravel pullout with room for maybe half a dozen vehicles. There were 2 cars already there, a late-model sedan with Colorado plates and a battered pickup that I recognized as belonging to one of the local outfitters. I parked beside them and got out, shouldering my pack. The air was cold and damp, carrying the earthy smell of decaying leaves. The trailhead sign loomed before me, its wooden surface weathered by years of exposure. Granite Creek Trail. 8 miles to Whitmore Cabin. Difficulty: moderate. I had walked this path more times than I could count, but as I set off into the trees, I felt an unfamiliar sense of unease settling over me. The forest seemed different somehow, quieter than usual. The birds that normally filled the morning with song were conspicuously absent. Even the wind had died down, leaving an oppressive stillness that pressed against my ears. I hiked for about 2 hours, following the trail as it wound alongside Granite Creek. The water was low this time of year, exposing the smooth stones of the creek bed. In places, ice had begun to form along the edges, thin sheets of crystal that crackled underfoot when I crossed the shallower sections. The trees closed in around me, their trunks dark and imposing, their branches reaching overhead to form a dense canopy that blocked out most of the gray sky. As I climbed higher, the spruce gave way to lodgepole pine, their straight trunks rising like columns in a vast natural cathedral. The silence was absolute, broken only by my own breathing and the soft crunch of my boots on the trail. I found the hikers about half a mile from the Whitmore cabin. There were 3 of them, a man and 2 women, all in their mid-30s, huddled together on a fallen log. They were dressed for day hiking, their lightweight jackets and thin pants wholly inadequate for the cold. The man looked up as I approached, his face pale and drawn. His name was Adrian Marsh, I would later learn, a software engineer from Denver who had come to Wyoming for a week of hiking with his wife and her sister. The women were named Sarah and Emily, though I did not learn which was which until later. They were both crying, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. "Thank God," Adrian said, rising to his feet. "Thank God you are here. We did not know what to do. We tried to call, but there is no signal." I raised my hands in a calming gesture. "It is okay. You are safe now. I am Ranger Callahan. Dispatch told me you saw something. Can you tell me what happened?" The 3 of them exchanged looks. something passing between them that I could not read. Finally, Adrian spoke. We came up yesterday. We were planning to hike to the cabin and back, maybe spend a night if the weather held. We had heard about it online, one of those hidden gems kind of things. We knew it was technically off limits, but we figured, what is the harm? He paused, swallowing hard. We got to the cabin around 4 in the afternoon. It was in rough shape, like you would expect, but it seemed sturdy enough. We set up our camp outside, ate some dinner, watched the sunset. Everything was fine. Normal. He stopped, his eyes darting toward the trees. Go on, I said gently. It was after dark when we heard it. This sound, like nothing I have ever heard before. Not an animal, not the wind. It was like something moaning, but not quite. Sarah whimpered and buried her face in her sister's shoulder. Adrian continued, his voice dropping. We thought maybe it was just our imagination, The wind playing tricks. We tried to ignore it, go to sleep. But then we heard footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps circling our camp. I got out my flashlight and shined it toward the trees, but I could not see anything. Just the darkness and the trunks of the pines. I felt a chill run down my spine, though I kept my expression neutral. Did you see anything? I asked. At first, no. We stayed awake all night, huddled in our tent, too scared to move. But then, just before dawn, he trailed off, his face twisting with remembered terror. What did you see, Adrian? Emily spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. It was standing at the edge of the clearing, just standing there, watching us. It was tall, so tall and thin. Its arms were too long, and its face. She broke down, unable to continue. Adrian put his arm around her. We did not stay to look. We grabbed what we could and ran. We have been walking for hours, trying to find the trail. We were lost until we hit the creek and followed it down. I nodded, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to dismiss their story as hysteria, the product of overwrought imagination and a bad night in the woods. But there was something in their eyes, a raw terror that seemed genuine. These were not teenagers looking for attention or thrill-seekers spinning tales. These were ordinary people who had seen something that had shaken them to their core. I radioed dispatch and reported my location and the situation. I told them to send another ranger to escort the hikers back to the trailhead while I continued on to investigate the cabin. There was a long pause before dispatch acknowledged, and I could hear the hesitation in the operator's voice. Copy that, Callahan. Holloway is about 2 hours out from your position. He will meet the hikers at your current location. Be careful up there. I assured them I would and signed off. Then I turned to Adrian and his companions. Another ranger is on his way. His name is Mark Holloway. You can trust him. He will get you back to your vehicles safely. Adrian grabbed my arm. You are not going up there, are you? You are not going to the cabin? I gently removed his hand. It is my job. I need to see what is up there. Make sure there is no danger to other hikers. Do not go, Emily said, her eyes wide with fear. Please. Whatever we saw, it is still up there. I can feel it. I smiled, trying to project a confidence I did not feel. I have been doing this for a long time. I will be fine. You just focus on getting out of here safely. I gave them my extra water and some emergency rations for my pack, then set off up the trail. I did not look back, though I could feel their eyes on me until the trees swallowed me whole. The final mile to the Whitmore cabin was the longest of my life. The trail grew steeper here, switchbacking up the side of a ridge before dropping into a small clearing where the cabin stood. The sky had darkened considerably, heavy clouds pressing down on the treetops like a weight. The first flakes of snow had begun to fall, drifting lazily through the still air. I found myself moving slowly, my senses heightened to an almost painful degree. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of branch sent my heart racing. I kept one hand on the grip of my sidearm, though I knew that if I truly encountered what the hikers had described, a 9mm pistol would offer little protection. I reached the clearing just after noon. The Whitmore cabin stood at its center, a ramshackle structure of weathered logs and rusted tin roofing. The door hung open, swaying slightly in the wind that had begun to pick up. The hikers' camp was exactly where they had described it, a small dome tent, its rain fly askew, a fire ring with the cold ashes of last night's blaze. But something was wrong. The camp had been disturbed. The tent had been torn, its fabric ripped in long, parallel gashes. The hikers' gear was scattered across the clearing, sleeping bags and clothing strewn about as if by a violent wind. And everywhere, on the ground, on the trees, on the walls of the cabin itself, were strange marks. They were scratches, deep furrows carved into wood and earth alike. Some were nearly 2 inches deep, spaced about 4 inches apart, 5 marks in each group, like the fingers of an enormous hand. I stood at the edge of the clearing for a long time, my breath misting in the cold air. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back, to get out of there as fast as I could. But I was a ranger. It was my duty to investigate, to document what I found, to protect the public from whatever dangers lurked in these woods. I forced myself to move forward, my boots crunching on the frost-covered grass. I photographed the camp with my disposable camera, noting the pattern of destruction, the direction of the claw marks. I entered the cabin, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The interior was much as I remembered from previous visits, a single room with a collapsed bunk in one corner, a rusted stove against the far wall, the detritus of decades of abandonment. But there was something new. In the center of the floor, someone or something had carved a symbol into the ancient wood. It was roughly circular, perhaps 2 feet in diameter, with a series of radiating lines extending outward like the spokes of a wheel. In the center was what looked like an eye, or perhaps a spiral. I had never seen anything like it. I was still staring at the symbol when I heard the sound. It came from outside, from somewhere in the trees beyond the clearing. A low, keening moan that rose and fell like the wind, but was not the wind. It was the sound the hikers had described, the sound that had kept them awake through the long night hours. And hearing it now, in the gray light of that October afternoon, I understood their terror. There was something profoundly wrong about that sound, something that bypassed rational thought and struck directly at the primitive core of the brain. It was the sound of something that should not exist, something that violated the natural order of things. I drew my pistol and backed toward the cabin door, my eyes fixed on the tree line. The moaning continued, seeming to come from all directions at once. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that obscured my vision and muffled all sound except for that terrible keening. I reached the door and stepped outside, my back pressed against the cabin wall. The clearing was empty, but I could feel something watching me. I could sense its presence like a physical weight, pressing against my awareness. It was close. So close. And then I saw it. It emerged from the trees at the far end of the clearing, moving with a fluid grace that belied its size. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 8 feet from the ground to the top of its misshapen head. Its body was thin and elongated, wrapped in something that might have been skin but looked more like bark, gray and rough and fissured with age. Its arms hung almost to its knees, ending in hands with fingers that were too long, too many-jointed, tipped with the same black claws that had left the marks I had found throughout the camp. But it was the face that I will never forget, no matter how many years pass or how many miles I put between myself and those cursed woods. It had no eyes, or rather, it had too many. Dark hollows scattered across its skull-like head, each one seeming to track my movements independently. Where a mouth should have been, there was only a vertical slit that opened and closed slowly, rhythmically, as if it were breathing. And from that slit came the moaning sound, that terrible keening that seemed to resonate in my very bones. I raised my pistol and fired. The shot echoed across the clearing, impossibly loud in the snow-muffled silence. I saw the bullet strike the creature's chest, saw a spray of something dark and thick that was not quite blood. But it did not fall. It did not even slow down. It simply cocked its head, as if curious, and continued its slow advance across the clearing. I fired again and again, emptying my magazine into that nightmarish form. Each bullet found its mark. None of them had any effect. When the slide locked back on an empty chamber, I ran. I ran like I had never run before, like my very soul depended on it. I crashed through the underbrush, heedless of the branches that tore at my face and hands, heedless of the rocks that turned my ankles. Behind me, I could hear it following, that moaning sound rising to a pitch that seemed to pierce my skull like a knife. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out beneath me. I ran until I burst out of the trees and onto the trail, nearly colliding with Mark Holloway, who was coming up from below. "David," Mark shouted, grabbing my shoulders to steady me. "What the hell happened? Where is your weapon?" I could not speak. I could only point back the way I had come, my hand shaking uncontrollably. Mark looked past me, into the trees. For a long moment, he stood perfectly still, his weathered face unreadable. Then he nodded slowly and reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Holloway. We have a situation at Granite Creek. Requesting immediate backup. All units." The static-filled voice on the other end sounded confused, alarmed. "Mark, what is going on out there? What do you need?" Mark looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I had never expected to see in that grizzled veteran's gaze. I saw fear. "Just send everyone you have got," he said, "and tell them to bring the big guns." The next several hours are a blur in my memory, fragmented images and sounds that refuse to coalesce into a coherent narrative. I remember more Rangers arriving, their faces grim and determined. I remember Mark organizing search parties, sending teams into the woods with high-powered rifles and radios. I remember sitting in the back of a truck, wrapped in a shock blanket, trying to stop my hands from shaking. And I remember the darkness falling, the snow coming down harder and harder until the forest was a swirling white void, and the search being called off until morning. That night, we set up a base camp at the trailhead, a circle of vehicles with their headlights blazing outward, creating a ring of light in the encroaching darkness. No one slept. We sat around a hastily built fire, drinking coffee and speaking in low voices. The hikers had been escorted out hours ago, their statements taken, their contact information recorded. They would be interviewed again later by people with more authority than us. For now, we were alone with the mountain and whatever lurked upon it. Mark sat down beside me around midnight, pressing a fresh cup of coffee into my hands. "You want to tell me what you saw up there?" I shook my head, staring into the flames. "You would not believe me." I did not believe me. Mark was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I have been a ranger for 32 years, David, stationed in forests from Alaska to Florida. And in all that time, I have seen things that I could not explain, things that did not fit any natural explanation, things that made me question everything I thought I knew about the world." I looked up at him, surprised. He met my gaze steadily. 3 years ago, I was doing a routine patrol up in the Gros Ventre wilderness. I came across a campsite, completely destroyed. Tents ripped to shreds, gear scattered everywhere. No blood, no bodies, no sign of what had happened. The official report said bear attack. But I have seen bear attacks. Bears do not arrange their victims' belongings in perfect circles. Bears do not carve symbols into tree trunks. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Symbols?" Mark nodded. "Strange marks, like nothing I had ever seen. I took photographs, submitted them with my report. They disappeared from the file. When I asked about them, I was told there had been no photographs. I was told I must have been mistaken." He paused, his eyes distant. "That was when I learned that there are some things in this world that we are not supposed to talk about. Some things that exist in the shadows, in the gaps between what we know and what we are willing to accept." I told him everything then. I told him about the cabin, about the marks, about the symbol carved into the floor. I told him about the creature, its impossible height, its bark-like skin, its face full of eyes. I told him about the sound it made, that terrible moaning that still echoed in my ears. And Mark listened, his expression never changing, his coffee growing cold in his hands. When I finished, he let out a long breath. "Well," he said, "at least now we know what we are dealing with." He said it so matter-of-factly that I almost laughed. "You believe me?" I asked. Mark smiled grimly. "David, I have spent 3 decades pretending I do not believe the evidence of my own eyes. I am too old and too tired to keep lying to myself." He stood, looking out into the darkness beyond our circle of light. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Dawn came slowly, a gradual lightening of the snow-filled sky. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind nearly a foot of fresh powder that blanketed the forest in white. It was beautiful, serene, utterly at odds with the horror that lurked beneath. We organized into teams of 4, each group armed and equipped with radios. Mark and I led one team, along with 2 younger rangers named Ethan Brooks and Daniel Kim. Ethan was fresh out of training, barely 22, with the eager energy of someone who still believed in the fundamental goodness of the world. Daniel was older, quieter, a former Marine who had joined the Park Service after his discharge. He did not ask questions, just checked his rifle and fell into line. We set off up the trail as the sun crested the eastern peaks, its pale light filtering through the bare branches of the aspens. The forest was different in the daylight, in the aftermath of the snow. The claw marks I had seen the day before were hidden now, buried under inches of white. The trail was pristine, unmarked, as if nothing had ever disturbed its peace. But I knew better. I could feel the wrongness in the air, a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath my feet. We reached the cabin clearing around mid-morning. It was much as I had left it, though the snow had softened the edges of the destruction, filling in the gouges and covering the scattered gear. The cabin itself looked almost peaceful, its weathered walls dusted with white, smoke curling from its crumbling chimney. "Wait, smoke?" I raised my hand, signaling the team to stop. "There is smoke coming from the cabin," I said quietly. "Someone lit a fire." Mark's jaw tightened. "Stay behind me." We approached cautiously, spreading out to cover the clearing from multiple angles. The snow crunched softly under our boots, impossibly loud in the morning stillness. I kept my rifle raised, my finger resting alongside the trigger guard. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run, but I forced myself forward, step by step. We reached the cabin door. It was closed now, though I distinctly remembered leaving it open the day before. Mark positioned himself to one side, his rifle at the ready. Ethan and Daniel flanked the other side. I reached for the handle, my breath misting in the frigid air. 1, I mouthed. 2, 3. I threw open the door and we rushed in, our flashlights cutting through the dimness. The cabin was empty, or rather, it was empty of any living thing. The fire in the old stove was burning brightly, as if freshly stoked. On the floor, where I had seen the carved symbol the day before, there was now a body. It was a man, or had been once. He was dressed in hiking clothes, his skin pale and waxy, his eyes open and staring at the ceiling with an expression of absolute terror. I did not recognize him. He was not one of the hikers I had rescued, not any ranger I knew. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, with graying hair and a neatly trimmed beard. There were no visible wounds on his body, no signs of violence or struggle. He simply looked as if he had laid down and died of fright. Ethan made a strangled sound and stumbled back toward the door. Daniel remained impassive, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his knuckles whitened around the grip of his rifle. Mark knelt beside the body, checking for a pulse we all knew he would not find. "Been dead for hours," he said. "Maybe all night." He looked around the cabin, his eyes settling on the fire. Someone wanted us to find him. Someone lit that fire, knowing it would draw us here. "But who?" I asked. "And why?" Mark shook his head slowly. "I do not know, but I think we had better find out before anyone else dies." We searched the cabin thoroughly, looking for any clue that might explain what had happened. In the dead man's pocket, we found a wallet containing a Colorado driver's license. His name was Robert Aldrich, age 47, from a suburb of Denver. There was a photograph in the wallet too, a faded picture of a woman and 2 children smiling at the camera. His family. Somewhere out there, they were going about their lives, not knowing that their husband and father was lying dead on the floor of an abandoned cabin in Wyoming. It was the mundane details that got to me. The ordinary, everyday reality of Robert Aldrich's life, snuffed out in these remote woods by something beyond comprehension. We found something else in the cabin too, carved into the wall above the old stove, in fresh gouges that had not been there the day before, was another symbol. It was similar to the one on the floor, circular with radiating lines, but this one had additional markings around its perimeter. They looked almost like letters, though in no alphabet I had ever seen. Daniel photographed it with his digital camera while the rest of us stood watch. Nobody spoke. What was there to say? We carried Robert Aldrich's body out of the cabin and down the mountain. It took most of the day, 4 of us taking turns with the improvised stretcher we had fashioned from branches and rope. The forest seemed to watch us as we went, silent and still, waiting. I kept expecting to hear that moaning sound again, to see that nightmare figure emerge from the trees. But nothing happened. The creature, whatever it was, had apparently chosen to let us go. For now. The investigation that followed was unlike anything I had experienced in my career. Federal agents arrived within days, flashing badges from agencies I had never heard of. They took our statements, confiscated our photographs, and made it very clear that what we had seen was not to be discussed with anyone outside the official inquiry. The cabin was cordoned off, the entire area declared off-limits pending further notice. Robert Aldrich's death was ruled as exposure, complicated by a pre-existing heart condition. His family was informed of a tragic hiking accident. No mention was made of the symbols, the claw marks, or the creature that haunted those woods. I tried to go back to my normal duties. I tried to pretend that nothing had changed, but everything had changed. I could not look at the forest the same way anymore. Every shadow held the potential for horror. Every rustle of leaves set my heart racing. I started having nightmares, vivid dreams of being chased through endless woods by something I could never quite see. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, the echo of that moaning sound still ringing in my ears. A month after the incident, Mark Holloway disappeared. He had gone out on a routine patrol of the Box Creek area and simply never came back. Search parties scoured the forest for weeks, but no trace of him was ever found. No body, no gear, no sign of struggle. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed him whole. I was part of the search team. I walked those trails until my feet bled, calling his name until my voice gave out. I never found anything. But once, just once, as I stood alone in a clearing deep in the backcountry, I heard something. It was faint, carried on the wind like a whisper, but unmistakable. It was Mark's voice, calling my name. David. Help me. David. I searched for hours, following that voice as it drifted through the trees, always just out of reach. But no matter how far I went, no matter how fast I moved, I never found him. The voice faded with the daylight, and when darkness fell, I was alone again, lost in a forest that no longer felt like home. I resigned from the Park Service 3 months later. I could not do it anymore. I could not walk those trails, knowing what lurked in the shadows, knowing that my friend was out there somewhere, maybe alive, maybe worse than dead. The official story was burnout, stress-related leave that became permanent retirement. Only a handful of people knew the real reason, and they were not talking. I moved to a small town in New Mexico, as far from any forest as I could get. I took a job as a security guard at a local hospital, a mundane position that required nothing more of me than to sit at a desk and watch monitors. I thought I could escape. I thought I could leave it all behind. I was wrong. The dreams continued, growing more vivid with each passing year. I would find myself back in the Whitmore cabin, standing before that symbol carved into the floor. The creature would be there, watching me with its countless eyes, its slit mouth opening and closing in that horrible rhythmic way. Sometimes it would speak, though it had no voice in the traditional sense. The words would appear in my mind, cold and alien, like ice water poured directly into my brain. "We are old," it would say. "Older than your trees, older than your mountains. We were here when the first forest grew, and we will be here when the last tree falls. You have seen us. You carry our mark. You cannot escape." I would wake up gasping, my heart pounding, the taste of pine needles and blood on my tongue. And I would know, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that it was true. I was marked. I could never be free. Years passed. I grew older, my hair turning gray, my body slowly failing in the way bodies do. I married a kind woman named Helen who did not ask too many questions about my past. We had a good life together, quiet and uneventful. I never told her about what happened in Wyoming. I never told anyone. Some secrets are too heavy to share, too dark to expose to the light of day. But the dreams never stopped, and sometimes, late at night, I would catch myself staring out the window at the distant silhouette of mountains, wondering if the forest was still waiting for me, wondering if it would ever let me go. Then last month, I received a letter. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address, postmarked from a small town in Wyoming I had never heard of. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in handwriting that I recognized immediately. It was Mark's writing, the same cramped, precise script I had seen 1,000 times on incident reports and trail logs. The letter was dated October 17, 2022. exactly 25 years after the day we had found Robert Aldrich's body in the Whitmore cabin. It read, "David, I know you thought I was dead. I thought so too, for a long time. But it is hard to die when something will not let you. I have been in the forest all these years, living in the spaces between. They showed me things, David. Terrible things, wonderful things. They showed me what lies beneath the roots, what whispers in the wind, what watches from the darkness when we think we are alone. I am writing to tell you that they are coming. Not for me. I am already theirs. But for you. You carry the mark. They will not forget. They never forget. Run if you can. Hide if you must. But know that it will not matter. The forest does not forgive. The forest does not forget. And the forest always claims its own. Your friend, Mark." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after reading that letter, my hands shaking, my mind racing. 25 years. 25 years of trying to forget, trying to move on, trying to convince myself that what I had seen was some kind of hallucination, some trick of the mind brought on by stress and isolation. And now this. Proof that it was real. Proof that Mark was still alive, or something like alive, trapped in those woods with the creature I had seen. Proof that I was not safe, had never been safe, would never be safe as long as I drew breath. I showed the letter to Helen that night. I told her everything, the whole terrible story that I had kept locked away for a quarter century. She listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she took my hand and said the words that broke my heart. "I believe you. And I think you need to go back." She was right, of course. She was always right about the things that mattered. Running would not help. Hiding would not help. The only way to end this was to face it, to go back to that forest and confront whatever was waiting for me there. Maybe I would die. Probably I would die. But at least I would die fighting, instead of cowering in fear for the rest of my miserable life. I made my preparations carefully. I was 63 years old now, well past my prime. But I still remembered my training. I gathered weapons, supplies, maps of the Bridger Teton wilderness. I contacted a few old colleagues who I thought might believe me, rangers who had experienced strange things themselves over the years. Most of them thought I was crazy, but 2 of them agreed to come. Ethan Brooks, who had been with me in the cabin that day and had never quite recovered from what he had seen, and a woman named Sarah Chen, who had joined the Park Service in the years since and had her own stories to tell about the dark places in the forest. We arrived at the Granite Creek trailhead on a cold morning in late October, almost exactly 25 years after my first encounter with the creature. The parking area had been expanded, a new restroom building added, but otherwise it looked the same. The trailhead sign was still there, its wood weathered and cracked, its letters faded. Granite Creek Trail, 8 miles to Whitmore Cabin. Difficulty, moderate. I remembered the last time I had stood here, young and confident, unaware of what awaited me up that trail. I was not young anymore, I was not confident, but I was determined. We set off into the forest as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. The trail was much as I remembered it, winding alongside the creek through stands of spruce and pine. The snow had not yet come to these lower elevations, but the air was cold and the leaves had turned, carpeting the ground in shades of gold and red. We walked in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own fears. I could feel the forest around us, vast and ancient and watching. It knew we were here. It was waiting to see what we would do. We reached the cabin clearing in the early afternoon. The old structure was still standing, though it had deteriorated further in the years since my last visit. The roof had partially collapsed, and the walls were thick with moss and lichen. The fire ring from the hikers' camp was long gone, overgrown with grass and wildflowers. But the marks were still there. I could see them on the trees, on the walls of the cabin, deep furrows that the passage of time had not erased. 5 marks in each group, like the fingers of an enormous hand. We searched the area carefully, looking for any sign of Mark or the creature he had written about. We found nothing. The cabin was empty, its interior dark and moldering. The symbol I had seen on the floor was still there, though it was hard to make out beneath the debris and decay. We photographed everything, made notes, set up camp at the edge of the clearing, and then we waited. The first night passed without incident. We took turns keeping watch, our weapons ready, our senses alert for any sign of movement. But the forest remained quiet, peaceful, betraying nothing of the horror that lurked within. I slept fitfully when my turn came, my dreams filled with fragmented images of Mark's face, the creature's countless eyes, the sound of that terrible moaning. When I woke, the sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Another day in the wilderness. Another day of waiting. It was on the third night that everything changed. Sarah was on watch, sitting by the fire with her rifle across her knees. Ethan and I were in our tents, trying to sleep. I was drifting in that twilight state between waking and dreaming when I heard it. The moaning. That same terrible sound I had heard 25 years ago, rising from the forest like a cry of anguish, like a hymn of despair. I was on my feet in an instant, my rifle in my hands. Ethan burst from his tent beside me, his face pale in the firelight. Sarah was standing now, her weapon raised, her eyes fixed on something in the darkness beyond our camp. "It is here," she whispered. "Oh God, it is here." I saw it then. It emerged from the trees just as it had before, that impossibly tall figure with its bark-like skin and its face full of eyes. But it was not alone this time. There were others behind it, smaller but no less nightmarish, their forms twisted and wrong in ways I could not quite comprehend. They moved through the forest like shadows, like smoke, surrounding our camp in a silent circle that cut off any hope of retreat. We are going to die here, I thought. We are all going to die, and no one will ever know what happened to us. And then I heard another sound. A voice speaking from somewhere within the ring of creatures. A familiar voice, hoarse with disuse but unmistakable. "David, you came." The creatures parted, and Mark Holloway stepped into the firelight. He was changed. That was the first thing I noticed. His body was still recognizable, still essentially human, but there was something else there now, something that showed in the way he moved, the way he held himself. His eyes, which had once been a clear blue, were now dark, almost black, reflecting the firelight like the eyes of an animal. His skin had taken on a grayish cast, rough and textured like the bark of a tree. He smiled when he saw me, but it was not a smile I recognized. It was too wide, too knowing, too old for the face that wore it. "Hello, old friend," he said. "It has been a long time." "Mark," I breathed. "What happened to you? What are these things?" He spread his hands in a gesture that might have been welcoming or might have been threatening. "They are the forest, David. They have always been the forest. They were here before your people came, before any people came. They are the roots and the branches, the earth and the sky. They are everything that watches from the shadows, everything that whispers in the wind. And they chose me. They claimed me, just as they will claim you." I raised my rifle, aiming at his chest. I could feel Ethan and Sarah beside me, their weapons ready, but I knew with a terrible certainty that our guns were useless. Whatever Mark had become, whatever these creatures were, bullets would not stop them. Nothing would stop them. Mark laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "You cannot fight what is already inside you, David. The mark you carry, the dreams you have, they are all part of the process. They have been preparing you for 25 years, reshaping your mind, your soul. You are almost ready." He took a step closer, and I saw that his hands had changed too, the fingers elongating, the nails darkening into something that looked disturbingly like claws. "Ready for what?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "Ready to join us, to become one with the forest, as I have, as all marked ones eventually do." He was close now, close enough that I could smell him, a strange, earthy scent that was not quite human, not quite animal, not quite plant. "It is not death, David. It is transformation. It is a becoming. You should be grateful." Most people never get to experience what lies beyond the veil. Most people live and die without ever glimpsing the true nature of the world. I looked at the creatures surrounding us, at their twisted bodies and their empty faces. I looked at Mark, at what he had become, and I made my choice. "No," I said, "I will not become like you. I will not become like them. Whatever you are offering, I refuse." Mark's smile faded. He looked at me with something that might have been sadness, might have been pity, might have been something else entirely. "You do not have a choice," he said. "None of us ever had a choice." And then he raised his hand, and the creatures surged forward. What happened next is difficult to describe. Time seemed to slow, each moment stretching into eternity. I fired my rifle again and again, watching the bullets pass through the creatures without effect. I heard Ethan screaming beside me, heard Sarah shouting something I could not understand. The creatures were upon us, their clawed hands reaching, their mouths opening to reveal teeth like needles. I felt pain, sharp and bright as something tore into my flesh. I felt cold, a bone-deep cold that seemed to seep into my very soul. And then I felt something else. A presence, vast and ancient, pressing against my mind. It showed me things. Terrible things. Wonderful things. Just as Mark had said. It showed me the forest as it truly was. Not a collection of trees and animals, but a living organism. A consciousness spread across millions of acres. It showed me the creatures that dwelt within it, not monsters but organs, extensions of that greater whole. It showed me my place in that system, the role I was meant to play, and it showed me the truth. The forest was hungry. It had been hungry for a long time, centuries, millennia. Humans had once fed it, in the old days, before the coming of civilization, sacrifices, offerings, acknowledgments of its power. But those days were gone, and the forest had been forced to adapt. Now it fed on fear. On isolation, on the lost and the forgotten, the hikers who strayed too far from the trail, the rangers who ventured too deep into the wilderness. It took what it needed and gave nothing in return. It was not evil, exactly. It simply was. A force of nature, as old as the mountains and twice as patient. I understood, in that moment of terrible clarity, why I had been chosen. Why Mark had been chosen. Why Robert Aldrich had died in that cabin, and why the hikers had seen what they had seen. The forest needed servants. It needed eyes and hands in the human world, beings who could lure others into its embrace. We were to be its priests, its missionaries, spreading the word of its existence to all who would listen. And those who would not listen would become food. No, I said again, but my voice was weak now, barely a whisper. Please, I do not want this. The presence did not respond. It simply continued to press against my mind, breaking down my resistance, reshaping my thoughts. I could feel myself slipping away, feel my identity dissolving into something larger, something older. I was becoming part of the forest, just as Mark had, just as countless others had before me. In a few more moments, I would be gone, and something else would walk the world in my place. And then, inexplicably, it stopped. The pressure vanished. The creatures withdrew, melting back into the shadows as silently as they had come. Mark stood before me, his dark eyes wide with confusion, his clawed hands hanging at his sides. "What?" he said. "What is happening?" I did not understand it either. I was lying on the ground, bleeding from a dozen wounds, my mind still reeling from the assault it had endured. But I was still me. Somehow, impossibly, I was still David Callahan. And in my hand, I realized I was holding something. The letter Mark had sent me. I had kept it with me, folded in my pocket, a talisman against the darkness. And in the chaos of the attack, something had happened, something had changed. I looked at the letter, at the words Mark had written in his cramped, precise script, and I understood. "The forest does not forget," the letter said, "but neither do I." Mark had written those words, not the creature he had become, but the man he had been, the friend I had known for so many years. Somewhere, deep inside that twisted form, some part of Mark Holloway was still fighting, and that part had intervened, had pulled me back from the brink when nothing else could. "Mark," I said, pushing myself to my knees, "I know you are still in there. I know you can hear me. You have to fight it. You have to resist." His face contorted, a battle raging behind those dark eyes. "I cannot," he said, his voice cracking. "It is too strong. It has been too long. It has claimed everything I was." "No," I said, struggling to my feet. I crossed the distance between us and grabbed his arms, forcing him to look at me. "You wrote that letter. You warned me. You saved me just now. That was you, Mark. That was the ranger I knew, the man who taught me everything about these woods. You are still in there, and you can fight this." For a long moment, he was silent. The creature stirred in the shadows, sensing weakness, sensing opportunity. Then Mark closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. "Go," he said. "Take your friends and go. Now. Before I cannot hold it back anymore. Mark. Go, David. And whatever you do not come back. Do not let anyone come back. This place is lost. It belongs to the forest now. And I belong to it too." He pushed me away, and I stumbled backward into Sarah and Ethan. They caught me, held me up, their faces pale with shock. "We have to leave," I said, my voice hoarse. Now, run. We ran. We ran through the forest, stumbling over roots and rocks, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us, I heard the moaning start again, rising to a terrible crescendo that seemed to shake the very earth. But the creatures did not follow. Mark was holding them back, using whatever remained of his will to give us time to escape. We made it to the trailhead as dawn was breaking. Sarah's truck was where we had left it, and we piled in, not caring about our wounds or our exhaustion. Sarah floored the accelerator, and we rocketed down the forest road, leaving the Granite Creek area behind us in a cloud of dust and gravel. I looked back once, as we crested a ridge and the forest fell away below us. In the distance, I could see the canopy of trees stretching to the horizon, a vast green ocean hiding untold horrors beneath its surface. And somewhere in that ocean, my friend Mark Holloway was fighting a battle he could never win, giving everything he had to hold back the darkness. We made it out. Ethan and Sarah and I, we made it out of those woods alive. But we left something behind, our innocence, our certainty, our belief that the world made sense. And we left Mark. I never saw him again. I never received another letter, never heard another rumor, never found another sign that he still existed in any form. Maybe the forest finally claimed him completely. Maybe he found peace at last, whatever that means for something that has become more tree than man. I do not know. I do not think I will ever know. I am writing the story now, years later, because I believe the world needs to know the truth. Not the whole truth, not the unvarnished reality of what lurks in our wilderness areas. People are not ready for that. Maybe they will never be ready, but they need to know that there are places on this earth where humans do not belong. Places where ancient things still hold sway, where the rules we live by do not apply. The national forests, the wilderness areas, the remote backcountry that we think we have tamed. We have not tamed them. We have only stopped looking at what lives there. If you are reading this, I have one piece of advice for you. Stay on the trails. Do not go into the deep woods alone. Do not listen to the sounds that drift through the trees at night, no matter how much they sound like someone calling your name. And if you ever find yourself in a forest surrounded by silence, feeling like something is watching you from the shadows, run. Run as fast as you can, and do not look back, because the forest is patient, the forest is hungry, and the forest does not forget. I still have the dreams sometimes. I still wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, that terrible moaning echoing in my ears. Helen holds me when that happens, tells me it is okay, tells me I am safe. But I know the truth. I will never be safe. None of us will ever be safe. Because somewhere out there, in the vast and ancient wilderness of the American West, something is waiting. Something that has been waiting for a very long time. And one day, whether it is tomorrow or next year or 20 years from now, it will come for me. It will come for all of us. And when it does, there will be no escape. There will be no second chances. There will only be the forest and the darkness and the endless eternal hungry patience of the things that dwell within. Listen to the whisper of the woods, but beware the roar that follows. Trust me on this. I learned that lesson the hard way, and I am still paying the price.